All right, just working on the final listen to before it all kind of gets stitched together and stuff. So this is the intro for the video. It's one of these directions. All right, it's short intro. Just letting you know this one's gonna be a long one. This is gonna be probably about 2.5+ hours long. Start to wherever 2.5 hours is. But a pretty good chunk of it. This is going to be covering about a third of everything that's written so far. It's kind of exciting. There's a lot more that will go into it to flesh things out. There's a lot of explaining instead of actually seeing it organically through the narrative. So things like that will get changed. Also, transitions when you go from one area to the next. I need to add a few more bits that kind of smooth that out so that when you're listening to it, it isn't just the end of one sentence and it's just like bam, you're in another situation. So a few things like that, but either way, this is what it is, all right?
Chapter 1. The Kid. Cassandra's bed has a humble wooden frame, made from the soft brown wood of the outer forest. She lay deep in slumber, her body adorned with a threadbare quilt she had stitched together from old fabric scraps. Despite its worn appearance, the bedding was perfectly warm and comforting, cocooning her in a swath of faded colors. A rickety wooden bookshelf stood against one wall, its shelves mostly empty except for a bit of dust, a few cobwebs, and a bowl which contained the remains of a fat little fish with no name. It had died yesterday, though its passing won't be of any great concern. It had lived a good life, and died with a full stomach. Why, it would still have had children, had it not eaten them as they were born. Tomorrow, she will take it out into the forest and offer it to the beetles as a show of thanks. A tiny gesture, considering the fact that she will ignore their warnings. The room would be an uncomfortable space, were Cassandra a bit older and a few inches taller. It was certainly small, with no space for even a window. On the opposite side of the room was a wooden desk, covered in ink stains and surrounded by scattered parchment. Her handwriting skills would never be considered an art form, but with time and a little patience with herself, she could both read and write. To be sure, there were words she does not know, nor would she recognize, but for a 9-year-old she would be seen as clever, if not above average, for never having any formal education. The floor was a mix of perfectly even tan wooden planks and a worn-out rug that had seen better days. It was the one thing in her room that she would always keep clean, as her father had once exploded into anger when he found it caked with mud. She wasn't one to neglect her responsibilities, however the night before had been difficult and she went to sleep as soon as she got to her room. She had left a trail of mud leading from the front door, and her bed sheets would take hours to clean, but that old rug seemed to be the only thing that bothered anyone. Her mother, Catherine, would often step in should Weslow become aggressive, but this time she just stayed quiet. It was her way of agreeing with him, and she hated it, but she knew it must have been important to the both of them. It was a simple mistake that ended with more than she cared to go through, so for everyone's sake, it was kept spotless. The pattern of intricate designs were long faded from years of use, but the overall color reminded her of bright red tomatoes, which had been on her shit list since before she could remember. Cassandra groans and turns over in bed. She can hear the sound of glass shattering and yelling through the heavy wood of the walls, but it had become common to her unconscious state, as something most usual within the house. Like the cracking of logs over a fire in winter or the sound of the rain crashing upon her small cottage in the woods, it was not enough to pull her out of her dreams. As far as she was concerned, the earliest moments of the morning centered on having a bear for a pet. It seemed her parents were away, and even though it was very small, she ran about the cottage, overturning furniture and altogether, overreacting. Before the screams of the next room could register with her, Cassandra's thoughts were of how silly she was behaving towards a very friendly little bear. It was a foolish representation of herself, and she found herself immediately annoyed. But the space around her melts away as, finally, the real world begins to sink in. She can hear her father yelling unrecognizable words, and her mother, screaming. Cassandra throws off the layers of patchwork that make up her sheets and runs towards the adjacent room, but her parents' door is shut. Even at the age of 9, she knows she could never move it an inch. The wood was different from most because it was almost as hard as stone. But still, the house shook as her father raged against whatever drunken irritation possessed him today. Catherine would often pull Weslow away in these moments, giving Cassandra time to go elsewhere of her own accord. The heavy doors became the armor her mother used to protect her until he eventually calms. But today, Cassandra has had enough. She pounds her small fist against the door and screams for Catherine, who can be heard sobbing. Time dragged on as Weslow slowly opened the door, but before she could spot her mother through the upturned furniture, fallen books and smashed artwork, Weslow pushes her to the ground. The look on his face took the fight out of Cassandra, and her voice caught in her throat. His rage seemed so out of control that his red and watery eyes reflected the smoldering embers of the fire that had lit the living room. "Get out," he says coldly, his tone flat and emotionless. Pulling her by the collar of her shirt, he opens the front door, and tosses her out like a disobedient pet, onto the cold and dry morning dirt. A small gathering of debris broke the worst of her landing, but she still fell hard and rolled side over side for several meters. Cassandra picked herself up, her knees scraped and her heart pounding in her chest. With a grimace plastered across her face, she dusted herself off as best she could. The cold dry dust would work well enough to stop the tiny spots of blood that began to pool over the broken skin of her knees. Unlike a certain friend of hers, she had no skill for the tricks that could cast off dirt, or how to tell directions with nothing but a feather. Or even the skills of her friend Yeslen, who was slow to learn most things, but excelled at mixing herbs. The sort that could accelerate the rate at which small wounds heal, would be a useful one to pick up, and she reminds herself to ask about it when she sees her next. The sky was a dull, ashen gray, which cast its gloom over the clearing around her home. The weather perfectly complemented her mood, and she found herself feeling thankful the rains had passed by the time she made her grand arrival out into the world. No more than a few patches of grass grew so close to her house, and so Cassandra liked to think that her father poisoned the very ground with his presence. She looks up to her home, its dark blue wooden walls standing tall and imposing, while she could do nothing but shake her head to clear her thoughts. Today was just another addition to the list of crappy starts to what is usually a pretty good day. The sounds of earthenware containers shattering and furniture being destroyed was going to continue, but the house would never let the sounds escape. She had seen little in that brief moment through the open door, but it had told her everything she needed to know. Cassandra's small fists trembled with anger as she thought of her mother trapped in that kind of tempest. Weslow's face, contorted with fury, was etched into her memory. But her mother would endure, as long as Cassandra left and stayed out of the way. She knows he couldn't hurt her if she stood up to him, her friends have told her all about the way he gets. He stumbles into town, already reeking of alcohol, then continues from bar to bar until he starts a fight, eventually getting beaten and thrown into one of the hundreds of alleyways. Possibly, the only positive thing anyone's ever said about him was that he somehow managed to live so long, but Cassandra was not convinced anyone ever meant it as a good thing. Long stacks of blue logs made up her home, with wood that was impossible to harvest unless naturally fallen. While en route they would be as hard as stone. Nearly as hard as stone, meant that getting back inside would never work. It left a sickening feeling in her stomach, but if she remained inside she would only risk getting the worst of Weslow's anger. She walks to the back of her home, her bare feet atop the cold-packed earth sending shivers up her spine. But fortunately or not, this wasn't the first morning of its kind, and Cassandra was ready. There were never any sounds this close to her home. The massive trees prevented any substantial breeze from passing through, and the animals seemed to avoid the large clearing of their property. No birds with their morning song ever greeted Cassandra's arrival, but at the least, there would be plenty once she got closer to the forest. After moving a few carefully placed stones, she gathers a small pack of clothes from a box, wrapped in a brown scrap of fabric, and removes a small blue knife, found several weeks ago as she traveled through the forest. She stares at it darkly, and remembers her mother making her swear to never harm Weslow, even though she thinks it would be pretty easy to catch him unaware to end both their problems at once. She made the promise with blood, but it was what it took for Cassandra to begin her training, and she would never betray her mother's trust. The tiny scar on her thumb reminded her of that much. But still, you grow stronger every day, Catherine would say, and Cassandra knew it wouldn't be long before she would put a stop to her father's nonsense. Deciding to focus on getting through the forest, she takes the knife and cuts a strip of cloth from her pack. She takes a few small blue leaves and wraps them around the wooden blade, their leathery toughness making a suitable sheath. She had to use every resource available to her, and so her clothes were also made from the forest leaves. Layers of them sewn together and treated in oils would retain their soft and supple nature, and a simple tunic design allowed her plenty of mobility. After pulling the clothes over top of her nightgown, she uses the strip to tie the bundled-up knife, just below her knee, before setting out into the forest. The cool morning air wrapped around her, casting off any remaining haze from having woken up no more than a few minutes ago. The sky above was a tapestry of thin gray clouds, moving slowly as the rising sun peeked out over the horizon. It was going to rain again, but for now the crisp earthy smell was something to enjoy. Once she gets to the city, it would be very different. Chapter 2. Blue Trees and Red Vines. The forest always seemed welcoming to her. The massive leaves above provided few patches of dappled sunlight, yet still it danced upon the forest floor, illuminating vibrant mosses and wildflowers that painted the landscape in a riot of colors. With each step deeper into the woods, Cassandra's senses heightened. She could feel the coolness of the forest floor beneath her feet and let out a small shiver. Her shoes were made of the leaves of the forest, tough, thin, light, supple, and waterproof, but at the sacrifice of warmth. She decided that she would set out for a run to warm up, and Cassandra takes off into a steady, though cautious jog. The softness of the moss clung to the tiny hairs of the fior leaves that cushioned her soles, but it also helped keep her steps silent. The occasional rustle of leaves, as unseen creatures scurried away, helped set her mind to task. She had learned to navigate the blue forest, modifying her path each time to evade the creatures that called this forest home. The forest floor bore evidence of their presence, tiny paw prints reminiscent of mice and larger webbed tracks that left deep, four-pronged gashes in the earth. Cassandra had adapted, randomizing her route to avoid the predictable patterns of these inhabitants. But today, a sense of unease settled within her. Her recent confrontation with Yeslens still echoed in her mind, and his eyes, burning red with anger, haunted her thoughts. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. There were a few tricks to getting by in the forest, and it took more curiosity than caution to figure them out. But even after years of moving through, there was always something new to discover. The smallest kinds of life seemed like a safe place to start when she first became curious, but she didn't expect that so much of her initial trips would be filled with following the lives of tiny blue-striped beetles. She couldn't stand bugs at first, and she'd get upset each time she found them in her hair or clothes, but they never seemed interested or bothered enough to bite her. They surely could, for protruding below their 3 sets of eyes were 2 sharp rows of mandibles, but it didn't take long for her to find out how they survive. For around 4 days a month the rain falls non-stop, making traveling through to town impossible. But after the great storms pass, the flood waters push the town's filth and trash into the forest, where it's broken down by creatures such as the little beetles. Each month they'll eat the garbage or bloated remains of the dead that gets washed in from the city. Within a few days they strip everything off the dead, leaving nothing but bones behind. It was a disturbing sight to be sure, at first. But after she learned that the various animal bones could be used for picking locks, she came to absolutely love the creepy little things. She overheard the older guild members saying that any lock worth picking will be warded against metal tools, but nothing could detect bone. That meant that each month she could collect enough to sell and treat her friends, and as the few dozen bones rattled in her bag, she was eager to meet up with them. Living in the center of the blue forest had moments of great peace, but it also cut Cassandra off from the entire world. She has no one she can speak to, no neighbors to visit, and no food stalls to beg from. But most importantly, her friends could never come here. She needed them in her life, so she wouldn't risk them being hurt. What's more is that they cared about her just as much. They didn't act or talk the same way around her as they did with everyone else, and it wasn't just because she had saved their lives. They always make time for her, they always want to hear about her training at home, the things she discovers in the forest, and to tell her their stories too. One was always in the middle of some silly new problem of gigantic proportions, with Cassandra getting roped in to help. Yet you might be forgiven for thinking that the other brought some manner of caution or maturity to the group, because for the truth of it, 19-year-old Yeslens was in many ways so much worse. A stolen item could be replaced, and sometimes a person may want to see them beaten to a pulp, but Yeslens was a lot trickier when it came to getting what she wants. Though dangerous instances may be rare in comparison, it meant that when Yeslen needed help, things were already really bad. There was probably so much more than what they told her, but Cassandra understands that they have to do things to get by, and they're the sort of things they don't want her anywhere near. Over time, Cassandra found that the blue bugs seemed to respond to her. This took quite a long time to notice, but eventually, they weren't in her hair anymore. At times a large group of them would rise up out of thin air, directly in front of her path, gathering en masse to the point where she would have to find another route through. On more than one occasion she had even gotten lost, only to follow a path of beetles towards where she needed to go. Not back to their nest or back where she came from, but as though they understood her intentions and were doing their best to help. Such behavior didn't extend far beyond little bugs though, and after the sun sets there was nothing that could help. Everything about the forest was hostile at night, down to the scattered red vines that sought to expose anything unnatural to the forest that happened to stop for more than a moment. They illuminate when disturbed in places where the sun cannot reach them, and at night. They were also why cutting a path through wouldn't work. They're hard to see, and once severed, every attached section for 3 meters would instantly glow. Even if only for a moment, being exposed so clearly would draw out the worst kind of attention. With the light still piercing through the trees, this would be among the last chances she gets to be still until she reaches the other side of the forest. Squatting down to steady her breathing after her run, she closes her eyes to recall the events of that morning. Weslow reeked of alcohol, and there were some signs that he was recently in a fight. His shirt was torn, with a few dried brown blood stains trailing down his chest. He had some fresh bruises around his eyes and lips too. He got beat up, she whispered aloud. He's so fucking pathetic. It was a regular sight to see him in such a state, then taking his frustrations out on his family, but there were times when everything seemed fine, yet her mother would send her away, sensing something must be off with Weslow. Those times were by far the worst. Her mother had to conceal her injuries with thick makeup or wear layers of clothing to hide the purple swelling from bruises. She never went anywhere to escape, but she would still put on a show as though Cassandra couldn't tell what was wrong. Even so, it would show in Catherine's movements during training. At times she might only use one hand to fend off Cassandra's attacks, or she would forego the quick steps she used to dodge, instead bearing down and pivoting as she blocked and parried. There was no way to comprehend it fully. Her mother had been training her in self-defense since the age of 4, and now, on the cusp of her 10th birthday, Cassandra knew that she herself possessed the strength enough to kill him. Her mother had no reason to endure such abuse, she could certainly overpower Weslow effortlessly. Shaking off her contemplation, Cassandra became acutely aware of the need to press on. There was nothing left for her back home. With renewed determination, she resumed her journey, knowing she had no more than a half-hour's time until she reached the outskirts of the slums. Finally, a glimmer of familiarity emerged, a small stream she had often crossed farther to the north. With a sense of relief, she decided to continue on in this direction. She estimated it would take only another 10 minutes to reach the city. However, as she crossed the stream and ventured no more than a few meters in, her heart sank. A fog was gathering at an alarming rate and the sound of the stream completely disappeared. Even so, with an idea of the direction she has to go, she decides to press on. But once again, found herself stopping before a thin line of beetles. She crouches down and whispers, "I'll deal with whatever it is. I'm in a hurry." At times, this would be plenty for them to allow her passage. She was aware that a possible danger lay ahead, but the morning had left her with little patience for finding a new path forward. "You're getting stronger with each passing day." Her mother's words rang through her mind, and it was enough for her to make her decision final. But more and more beetles gathered, piling on top of each other and raising several inches above the ground. Within a few minutes there would be enough to completely block her path, so she takes the opportunity to hop over them, careful not to harm a single one. She meant to continue onwards, but realizes that her bag was no longer with her. Turning back, she sees it laying atop the mass of beetles. What's more was that she hadn't dropped it at all. The strap that held it in place had been chewed through in the second it took for her to jump over them. "I know you mean well, and thank you. But really, I'll be all right. May I have my bag back?" She reaches her hand for it, but the beetles retreat. Fine, she yells. Take it. But when I take the head of whatever stands in my way, you better give it back. And with that, she moves on, now running without a shred of caution. Her friends would be waiting for her, and that was all that mattered. Should she come face to face with this unknown danger, she would kill it. To Cassandra, it was as simple as that. Chapter 3. The Red Lake. Pressing past massive leaves and slipping through tightly packed trees, Cassandra's feet suddenly felt as though they had been kicked out from beneath her. She stumbles forward, all sense of equilibrium lost as she spills down an incline. She touches down hard onto her back, her head hitting hard against a stone that lay just under the mossy surface. Cassandra's head was still spinning as she stood up, the muscles in her back screaming at the effort. As her vision clears, Cassandra's mouth drops open in alarm. She was surrounded by a hazy white fog that poured out from within the very earth, parting to reveal a blood-red lake, stretching out into infinity. Sitting at the water's edge, their feet dangling below the surface, was a boy not much younger than Cassandra. An instinctual urge to call out a warning surged from within, but she immediately clamped both hands over her mouth, muffling any sound. She dropped to her knees, keenly aware of the stillness that enveloped the water's surface. Something was terribly wrong. Ensuring she remained hidden, Cassandra maneuvered side to side, inch by inch, cautious not to disturb the individual vines beneath her feet for too long, until she found better cover. Minutes ticked by in eerie silence, and just as doubt started to seep into her thoughts, the piercing sound of a man's voice shattered the tranquility of the surroundings. It came from across the lake, so Cassandra took that moment to scramble over to the closest tree that could afford her a better and safer view. It didn't take long for the yelling to get closer, the fog seemingly guiding her sight, as the only clarity she could see across the lake was a single spot, where before long, a man, eyes wide with frenzy, appeared yelling, "Please, come back." The fog thickened around the boy at the lake's edge, but at the man's words a new voice emerged. "I'm over here, Dad. Help me, I'm scared." Cassandra's mind reeled in terror. This wasn't right. The voice of the boy emerged through the fog, but the figure at the edge of the lake had still not moved at all. This was a trap, and it wasn't meant for Cassandra. The man, distraught as only a loving parent could be, sees the childlike figure and his words of comfort come pouring out effortlessly. This man wasn't Weslow, this was a good man. This was over. The water only rose to his waist, but halfway across, the man seemed to struggle. The mud had ripped the shoes off his feet, pulling him by force with every step he takes. He stops for only a moment, his energy draining rapidly. He still calls to the child, still yelling words of comfort. "You'll never have to be scared again, I will get you home safe, I will save you." But he has stopped for too long, and now the vines within the water begin to explode into radiant light. The water begins to swirl around, and from within the whirl emerges the form of a woman, her body dripping the glowing red water of the pond as though it were blood off the fangs of a beast. Cassandra was frozen, her eyes widening in horror. She wanted to scream, but the sound was lost to her as the billowing white cirrocumulus wisps threatened to pull Cassandra in with its force. Within seconds the fog had gathered into a sphere, encapsulating the man and now lifting him above to water to stand at equal height with the creature. "Run!" Every fiber of her being screamed at Cassandra, but she couldn't. The fear had its grip. "Run!" Again the words tore through her mind, but it made no difference. The maddening dance of mist began to rip at the man, slicing away chunks of his flesh as his screams burned into Cassandra. Clasping her hands over her ears did nothing to silence his agony, but the sound was enough to return a fraction of her senses. Looking down, she sees that the red vines had wrapped tightly around her left ankle, and were beginning to give off a light that drew her into the depths of despair. Panic surged through her and her entire body was trembling while the light continues to spread, as if to say, "You're next." She takes the small knife off her leg and managed to quickly cut herself free, not caring in the slightest that she sliced herself in the process. Her last glance back came as a matter of instinct, and what she saw would never fade in its clarity for the rest of her life. The vortex of fog was filled with blood. The man was nothing more than the gore within, save for one thing. The sphere lifts above the creature's form and bursts, its arms stretched above its head in welcome as the blood rains down upon it, and within its hands was the man's heart. Branches whipped at her face, leaving scratches, and every stone and vine caused her to stumble, but she kept running. The screaming in her mind wouldn't stop, forcing her to review the scene over and over. The warmth of the man's voice calling for his child, the screaming, the way the creature seemed so close to her kind, the sound of the blood bursting forth and splashing into the lake. There was no order to what happened, just relentless flashes with increasing clarity for every instance that played on repeat. The man's face agonizingly contorted in pain, the creature's black eyes twisted up into an expression of ecstasy, and now she sees, his heart had still been beating even while the rest was ripped apart. She didn't stop running until she could see the trees returning to the brown that indicated the worst was behind her. She could now feel the wetness of the blood on her face as she touches her cheek, but though the damage wasn't significant, the sight of her own blood returned her to that moment. The damp earthy smell in the air around the lake, the vines with their red glow, and now the blood on her hands, that may not entirely belong to her. With her flight of survival flooding her mind, she had relaxed for only a moment before the memories came flashing back into her reality. Clenching her hand to her mouth, she couldn't stop her body's violent reaction. The vomit pushed through her fingers and the tightness in her stomach forced her to her knees. Releasing the rest of her sickness took the air from every inch of her lungs, and she rolled on the ground, thrashing her filth-covered fingers against her throat, wordlessly pleading for air to return to her. The light begins to fade from her eyes, but she has just enough sense left to hear the only sound she needed. Fuck. Kid. No. What the fuck happened to? And despite the rest of the words fading into oblivion, Cassandra, tears streaking down her face, managed a small smile before losing consciousness. Chapter 4. The House of Rats. Sister Garliette sleeps in a room located closest to the gardens, which she feels has its share of positives and negatives. The room looks about the same as all the rest, however it did have its share of unique qualities. It may have originally been a washroom for as much as she knew, however hundreds of years ago when the grounds were new. Her window may have been a mural depicting some grand moment, perhaps. But during her time here, it has been no more than a rectangular hole in the wall. The grand mural was far from the end of her fantasy, as quite often she would be lost in thought, imagining the world as she would have liked it. Something calmer, most certainly. The weather, for one, was easily predictable if your guess was that it'll pour, then dry up, and then pour again. The problem was that there would be no more than a handful of minutes before the change would happen. The rainfall could clear, dry, then rain again a half a dozen times a day. Being the first to know when the storms are passing through, wasn't her most favorite feature. With the wind blowing hard enough to make the rain fall nearly horizontal through the opening, she usually wakes up cursing, with her sheets half wet. Whatever had filled the stone window had been destroyed hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. Today though, it wasn't a storm that woke her, but a voice. Her eyes flutter open as she absent-mindedly wipes her face of sleep debris, and she sees the first light of the day shining in. After a great yawn overtakes her, she listens. The singing is still there, but it is still a bit too early for the children to be awake. Perhaps one of the rats have snuck out. Oh well, she thinks. There was no great urgency to inspect the sound, as it rang through the gardens. Garliette slowly gets out of bed and pulls her outfit on over her nightgown. She was about to set a pot of water on to boil, but a thought occurred to her. That voice sounds so young, but none of the little ones know how to count so well. He goes all the way up to 20, she thinks, before hearing him start to describe what colors he must be seeing. Red, orange, white, blue. He must be in the center of the garden, where all the different flowers come together. She tosses her earthen cup to the ground. It was no great thing, as it crumbled harmlessly underfoot. It was the last of a batch she had made less than a week ago, but she would shape and fire a dozen more by the end of the day. For now, she was nearly frantic with excitement, and another broken cup didn't matter. Today, a new child may have arrived at Helu's diem. A small child by her guess. 4, maybe 5 years old, with a clear, beautiful voice, who was singing every word. It was a boy, which flitted through her mind as a negative, as she was hoping the next would be another girl, but the thought was swept away and replaced with her image of him as she quickly made herself the very least bit presentable, before throwing open her door and running toward the gardens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, once I caught a fish alive. From the moment she left her room, his voice was lost as she ran down the oppressively lightless hallway, but before she could pick it up again, the worst possible thing that could happen, happened. Rebecca had also woken up and stuck her head outside her door in time to hear Garliette charging toward the gardens. Her eyes grew wide as they quickly adjusted to the darkness, and understanding became evident. Still in her frumpy white sleep cottons, with her face covered in a thick green herbal mask, she made her move. Rebecca had no window in her room, so she could not have heard the boy, but everything about Gal's demeanor told her enough. "Not again, you evil witch!" she yelled as she burst out of her room, positioning herself to intercept Garliette. With a pass of her hand, the muddy face mask was swept away and thrown to the center of the hallway. "Out of my way!" Gal yelled. But Rebecca would not back down. Most of the children staying on the grounds were in their middle years, a stubborn time where they do their best to ignore every ounce of advice. There were a few, no more than several months old, but their care was decided upon by vote and tally. For Garliette to be in such a state, meant that they must be between 2 and 6 years old, she thinks. But in the rare instance a child should be found by a sister, she would be in charge of the child for a week, and if compatible, possibly for months beyond. Answer: due to the rectangular hole in her wall, Garliette has been able to spend with them what most would consider to be the cutest and most influential stage of their lives. Where every day is a fun new adventure as they look to her for help in their new environment. Where her guidance will live within them, forever. Her room gave her the advantage here, but she had to get past Rebecca. If I could just time it right, Gal thinks, Becca will only have one chance to stop me with one of her silly little magic tricks, but which one? She had 5 that Gal knows of. She can see clearly in the dark, but that wouldn't help her avoid getting bowled over, she thinks, as Rebecca is much smaller than her. But Garliette, unfortunately, isn't the quickest thinker, and so her plan came much too late. Rebecca simply placed a single finger against the wall, and it was done. Quick as lightning, a bright, thin white line crackled and traced itself down the wall and flashed across the ground towards the bit of mud she had thrown. Garliette couldn't have seen it. Rebecca was 2 steps ahead of her, and for just a second, the ground had become like ice, causing Garliette to let out a surprised yelp as gravity began to make little sense. But this wasn't over quite yet. Garliette had built up enough momentum that no matter which magic she used, her body would still crash hard into Rebecca, taking them both to the ground in a tangle. Each tried to get up, but the other kept pulling her back down. "See? You're not so clever, I knew you'd try something like this. Yet, you're still on the floor. How was that your plan? It did work, and you didn't even hear the boy. So I'm right. This is unfair. You can't claim another child when others are waiting. I won't allow it." "Allow? When did you become so important? And it's only for the first week. You're being dramatic. Let go." "Absolutely not. Help. Help me, anyone," Rebecca yelled at the top of her voice, in true dramatic fashion, all the while locking her arms around Gal's waist. Mere moments later, the hallway was lighting up and filling with giggling women, who all clearly understood the situation, and in the distance, she could hear the young ones waking up. It was time to give up. Fine, I said. Get off of me. You are absolutely shameless. What's going on? There's a new boy in the garden. How old is he, Gal? I couldn't see him, but I'd guess 4 or 5. I heard him singing his numbers and colors. Singing. The matron pushes past Garliette, with everyone in tow. The look Garliette gave to Rebecca would have to be revenge enough. But as they got to the gardens, there was no child to be seen. It was Trader Grellis' voice that cut through the commotion. "Fengia took the lad to the men's kitchens. Brash will know if the boy stands hearty and hale, and after that they'll bring him over to the women for coddling." A cold smirk of disappointment ran across more than a few of the women's faces, as this was a sign to scatter. Rebecca shook her head at Gal, waved hello to Trader Grellis, then began the walk back to her room. Unlike most of the men allowed into the house, Grellis wasn't there to court one of the residents. He was a longtime trader whose family had sold and supplied the house for generations. This, the sixth of his line to take up the kindness, was much less the rugged man than his father. And for a good reason. Grellis Senior the fifth was more of an adventurer than trader. The man couldn't sit still, and he pushed the limits of his journeys as far as he would dare, bringing the household more tales than fresh food. They would never complain, but the newest head of the family, they felt, was nothing less than a blessing. Food, clothing for all ages, and supplies to the point where they had to decline at times due to lack of space. Grellis the sixth, you see, loved every aspect of being a trader. His work was more than his legacy, but a sincere effort of goodwill to help those who could not help themselves. And nothing showed that quite as well as the woman he calls his wife. Where's your better half? She took off to the slums again, said something about the game those rats play. I don't remember the name, but she took a bag of those pressed leaf spheres they toss about. Will she be all right? My girl knows how to handle herself. Besides, they know her face is a good one, and the people down there would kill for a kindness. Sorry to the one who tries to take her away from that lot. But enough of your niceties, go on and ask about the boy. How old is he? He laughs heartily, you're as obvious as the weather. He's 3 years old. How do you know that? He told me. He speaks. Quite a lot, in fact. Nothing like you and I having a chat. You see, he says everything in song, but if you can follow his mind a bit, you'll see what he means. Wait, but where did he come from? Do you know that? I do not. Found him sitting on that patch of grass I planted a few years ago, naked as a bird and having a bit of a song. Which grew in wonderfully. You know, I got the seeds for that garden from. Her expression soured towards the change in topic. Ah, never mind. You only have ears for the lad, I see, and I don't blame you. Charming, wouldn't do the boy justice. I doubt the matrons will keep the boy for less than a month before saying he's clear to be amongst the sisters. But don't believe them. I put him in some fresh clothes after getting a diaper on him, and he's as healthy a lad as I've ever seen. They wouldn't. Calm, calm. I'm mostly pulling your leg. Everything about the boy is true, but it's more likely they'll want him making his introductions sooner than later. He's gonna be good to have around. Thank you, Grellis. Go on. Ah, but first, I nearly forgot, take this to your man Yeslens, he says as he pulls a dusty old book from his pack. The child had me forgetting that I was holding on to this. Of course. Farewell, trader. Answer, Garliette resigns herself to what comes next. She didn't know why, but as she waved goodbye to Grellis and walked closer to the men's kitchen, she began to feel nervous. She was awkward when turning down her fair share of advances, but they weren't the sort to persist. Honor for the men meant believing that any of them could be reconsidered even after having been refused. They would remain respectful at large, but the kitchens were a different story. There were no classes mandatory for the rats to attend, and they could leave at any age should they decide. No adults were allowed to press their knowledge, so they used other means to gain their interest. And for the last few years, the children were most in agreement that the food they ate during their lessons with the men was better by far. Entering the kitchens would be a hassle, but she would deal with it. She doesn't think that either of the two who've pledged themselves to her would be there. Joran would be preparing survival activities disguised as games for the young who were near the age of confliction. He would often consult her whilst devising these elaborate exercises, always unsure of whether a fun activity had taught enough or whether a serious lesson was fun enough. Like the others, he was in his own way, perfect. Taller than her by a hand, with a lean and muscular build, one would be forgiven for assuming he thought of nothing more than his own reflection. Nothing at all like Yeslens, who persisted in looking as though he most recently tumbled down a hill. He was quite charming when he wanted to be, but he loved nothing more than to collect and restore the crumbling works of literature that the trader Grellis would sometimes stumble across. How she wound up with a pair of brothers as options was the talk amongst the other sisters for a time. But for the truth of it, she had come to consider each as dear to her. But they likely wouldn't be there. Instead, Varian the Hungry, a younger man, new to the house, lingered beyond the entrance to the underground men's kitchens. He was watching as the women appeared in search of the child, though his expression was unreadable. Casting aside her irritation at the morning's kerfuffle, she set her mind to making her introduction. Hopefully she would find him more pliable than most of the kitchen men. Setting her most pleasant smile upon her face, she says, "They've kicked you out again. You must be Garliet," he says. "So you know of me." She replies, "I know what you're doing. When she wants something she'll try to talk to you," they said, all nice and casual. Then before you know it, she'll have you in her pocket. I don't put much faith in rumors, but you fit every bit of the description. That was quite the scene. I haven't a clue what you're talking about. Who told you that? He smiles sheepishly, and taps one finger against his left ear. I was born with a sliver of hearing infinite. Though I can't hear more than a few hundred yards, it's not a magic I can control. That being said, it probably wasn't the best plan, rushing down a woman of magic like Rebecca. I see, hungry for information. I would have imagined such a moniker would apply to someone more robust. But that makes perfect sense. I'll have something prepared for next time. I wish to see the boy. Will you try to stop me, my new friend Virion? Not at all, go ahead. I'm a man grown, so they really have no business putting me on guard duty over the silly pissing contest they play with the women. What about learning how to cook? I heard Brash wanted you helping out. My ears are nothing compared to how you come about your information. He assumed that my work with blades would do well in the kitchens, but it's not for me. I care not for the difference between a carrot chopped or sliced. That would be a waste of your talents, I'm certain. Peeling potatoes and chopping onions is not for me either. Why not teach the young? There's plenty of room for further education, and the times aren't getting any easier. Best not, or we'll have the lot of them throwing spoons against the walls by sundown. Then I'd actually feel bad during a scolding from Brash. He's far too serious. If it were up to me, let the children throw spoons, did you say? Why spoons? What madman puts a blade in a child's hand and tells them to toss it? Best get the aim down first, safety first and all that. Oh right, you see. You already sound like a teacher. Let the rats throw spoons or whatever. Then they can learn how to mend it and how to fix a wall as well, huh? I'll tell Grellis we need some supplies and I'll have a group for you by tomorrow. That way Brash shouldn't have to yell, and when you're dead and gone the little ones will keep your lessons alive. Everyone wins. Bring food. Did I just agree to something? I'm still in range to last a good while on the hunt. Most of the old ones like Brash would drop dead the second they left the grounds, so I'll stick to what I'm good at while I still can. Better not let them hear you call them old. Still, tomorrow you'll teach what you can, it won't take long, right? The idea is not hard to understand, it's just practice and a few tips really. Perfect. So 1 hour and then you can grumble off to your hunt. If any show promise, then we can also discuss a schedule for taking a few rats with you on your hunt. Although, you know we get more than enough supplies with Grellis as trader. I know, but you can never have enough money put away just in case, and food's the best way to get some. I've spent time as a raider and it's nasty work. It's wise to have your own paid men to keep things calm should the red come knocking. I've been here but a few days, but it seems like this place has only known peace, and I would prefer it stayed that way. Thank you Ver. Put in a good word with Rebecca for me, will you? Oh. And they might ask what happened to me. I believe I shall. I can already tell that you have the perfect temperament for this place. What should I tell the men? The truth, of course. That I was no match for you at all. Her laugh came as a surprise to Virion. Though not the most graceful sound, it was loud and infectious, and he couldn't help but smile as she passed down the stairs and through the doors to the underground. A chorus of noise assaulted her all at once. The sound reminded her of the battle arcade the warrior men set up for the young ones, except instead of a cacophony of clattering and yelling, it was more akin to a rowdy night in a tavern. They were singing, though the words were muffled through the heavy iron doors that stood before the true entrance to the kitchens. What's more is that she could hear the sound of pots being banged together in a rhythm that echoed into the hallway. This was nothing at all like what one would expect from a kitchen run by Brash. Demanding silence when at work, He was warden and executioner of any who would disrupt his flow. A state the kitchen women would often compare to a function of their own biology, mocking him as best they may, for what else could they do? The man will cook for everyone except the 13 adult women, a historical first for the house, leaving the other men to handle preparing ingredients and forging the occasional plate or cup. The women's kitchen became more of a meeting room for discussion or gossip than necessary for the running of the grounds. Though less than 50 rats, the 4 women who've chosen to run the kitchens used to struggle to feed every age every meal, let alone have time to manage lessons for the lot, and wash the clothing of the 22 girls under their own care. Before he arrived, the meals were very often a test of patience. Some of the younger ones would always end up refusing a meal, and the older children would pick at their food with very little enthusiasm. Instead, they would socialize, with childish pestering leading to fights among those closest to leaving the grounds that would leave the floor littered in the soft and crumbly remains of their cups and plates. Firing new ones every meal was exhausting for everyone. But now, you would hear nothing but the sound of food being devoured. No longer did the little ones complain, nor did the older ones have time to argue. They would finish their meals and go off with renewed drive toward whatever stood before them that day. Perhaps what insulted the women the most was that Brash had gotten to trade a Grellis. Under normal circumstances, Gal would have refused to believe that any of them could keep something to themselves. They had never kept secrets, as though the idea itself was unfathomable. Grellis III was said to go so far as to answer questions by singing outlandishly long and detailed songs and poems about how she learned the information. It was known to everyone that if you had something to keep hidden, you should never tell it to a trader. She thinks the saying must have originated with Grellis I, but to the point, Grellis VI would not share the ingredients he collected for Brash. We go way back, and I owe him a life debt. He saved our eldest from a bad spot, and he's been a good friend to our family for many years. I know how he is about his food, so I can't say nothing more. It would be much simpler if the head of the women's kitchen were of a softer temperament. Upon meeting Brash for the first time, the man had prepared a few meals as a courtesy, but she chose that very moment of goodwill to offer very harsh critique of his dishes. She would think of herself as consumed with regaining her position as best in the house, but it was clear to everyone else that she was completely in love with the man. But from the bumpy beginnings, things have only progressed negatively. As Garliette moves down the short hallway, it occurs to her that she's lightly pressing one foot upon the ground before the other. What's gotten into me, she thinks before straightening her back and clearing her throat. Her intention was to announce herself and demand they show the boy to her, but a loud, hum, behind her nearly made her jump out of her skin. With her vision finally adjusting to the dim light within the hallway, she turns, only to find herself blinded again. A gruff voice says, "No bother having to dress down Virion if it's you, what mission did you press upon him? How does your mad beard not shed throughout the entire kitchen?" she says, as she takes a step away to disentangle herself. "Because it knows better. Answer or I'll tell your pretty brothers in perfect detail how I caught you sneaking in here like you meant to make off with the child in a flour sack." "He'll be teaching a class in the morning," she says in a mumble. "It's only an hour, but more urgently I must inform you that he called you an old one." "So what that I'm old?" His lack of respect is mutual in any case. How a man could throw a blade makes zero bloody sense to me. But you did walk right by me without a single notice, so nothing seems impossible anymore. But I'll make a cook of him if it kills him. Your passion is an inspiration, now, can I? No. Go away. But a grin spreads itself upon his face as he says, "We've already named him." "No, you did not." "You're right, it's more truthful to say your man Grellis named him." "I'll kill him." "You won't. And he didn't do it with intention in any case." Says, "Make sure the lad's hearty and hale," and since then when we ask the boy's name he keeps singing the words, hearty and hale. He seems born with the hearty bit, so our wish for the lad is that he be hale. Garliette sighs in resignation, "I am defeated. Today is proving to be irksome. Do you intend to keep him with the men?" "We could, but this turn we've got men better suited for war than childcare." No one would deny that the system you women have done up with have kept those rats alive for years longer than most of them out there. You mean it? I would think a man of war would find our way too loosey-goosey. I don't know the last words, but I get your meaning, and yes. It should not work, and I don't know how it does, but they leave here strong. If you let me at least see the boy. Hale. Yes. I will help you with your heart condition. My what? Miss Dewell, I believe. What can you do? A lot. Now let me in. I don't trust your methods. What exactly will you do? Perhaps I'll tell her the story of how you named the boy. But I didn't. I'll not have you lie to her. You'll just have to tell the story to her, properly, over dinner. I doubt that she often hears such things about you, and I couldn't, not over dinner. I can't seem to find my words when she looks at me. I'm saying I'll figure something out. She's just not the easiest to talk to. Go in, but we have a deal. I swear to it. Thank you, brah. Get a move on. Okay, all right. Pulling open the door to the kitchens could only be described by Galliette, as though she were entering the heavens. The room was a spotless and shining white, and the reflection of the tube lights running along the ceiling instantly blinded her as she entered past the dim hallway. It was only for a second, but the chatter of noise within made it feel longer. She blinks a few times and comes to see 5 men staring at her with shit-eating grins on their faces. Galliette looks from corner to corner of the room, and doesn't see the boy at all. Before her mouth could open, the men broke out in laughter from the absolute dumbfounded expression on her face. And then they sang, "Hearty and hail, hearty and hail." They repeated the words with sharply rising and falling inflection, changing between a soft, almost girlish pitch to a low, deep rumble. "Where is he? Brash, get in here please." "Ah, that was quick. Your man Yaston took the lad through the underground to the matron then, it seems. I was told he was on the way." It was Fengia who spoke up then. Brash couldn't have known, they departed mere moments ago. "Deal's a deal," says Brash, over her shoulder. "Fuck. Any luck I could go through and—" "None. Ain't no light down there, and we've got no one to spare to guide you. Normally we wouldn't take a lad that young through, but when we heard Yaston he ran right into the tunnel. Yast has got him, but it doesn't seem to bother him a bit. The dark, I mean. What was he like, Fen? Is telling you a part of this deal I heard you making with the big man?" "It is not," Brash says. "I got it, I'm going." Chapter 5. Return. He's never seen the kid look like this before, and he can't imagine what could have happened. Cassandra ran errands for his guild, doing jobs that are otherwise meant for capable adults. More than that, the first time they met 3 years ago, was because she saved his life. His life. A 13-year-old member of the guild saved by a starving 7-year-old blade of grass wielding no more than a sharpened twig. He yelled, pleading with her silent and still form, "Come on, you're okay." He forces out a laugh in desperation. "You don't usually go in for these types of pranks, but if you're starting today you really got me, kid, please, come on. I know whatever it was, it would have to be real bad, but you've seen worse. You've got to have been through worse, right? And you always turn out all right. Wait." He pauses for a moment to think. "Damn it, where the hell is Yes? She's supposed to have been here with me," he says in his panic. The sounds from the edge of the forest was like a siren. Every creature seemed to be crying out all at once in a deafening cacophony. He put his right ear against her back but couldn't hear anything amongst the noise, but just then a look of hopeful uncertainty spread across his face. There was a fight a few weeks ago, and it immediately stuck out as important. "I thought I killed that fat fuck for well, you showed me how to check." He turns her onto her back and takes one of her shoes off, rolling the sock just below her ankle. Then, placing 2 fingers against the back of her ankle, he lets out a sigh of relief. "I owe you for showing me that one, but are you gonna come too? I'm not exactly the biggest guy to go carrying you around." He softly chuckles and says, "I wonder if Lawson wouldn't mind lending a hand," forcing his tone to remain light in case she can hear him. He shakes her softly, but with no response he sets his mind to what he has to do. She was out like a light but breathing softly now. With a pass of his hand inches above her body, the filth was swept away and he tosses it back towards the screaming forest. Overall, she seemed unhurt, but he was the furthest thing from a doctor that you can get and he just didn't feel very confident with that assessment. From off his neck he takes a long scarf and twists it into a sling. Gathering her onto his back, he starts towards a place he knows can help. There's gonna be trouble but that can wait. You better have a good story, kid, he says, as he makes a slow start back. After a few minutes, he looks up just in time to see the first drops of rain. As he makes his way back towards the town, the atmosphere grows increasingly ominous. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, quickly swallowing the last remnants of sunlight. The air grows heavy with the smell of rain, carrying with it a sharp earthy scent. The wind picks up, whistling through the narrow alleyways and sending dust and debris swirling in eddies. As they enter the outskirts of the slums, the dilapidated state of the buildings become apparent. Crumbling facades lined the streets, their paint long faded and peeled away, revealing the decaying wood beneath. Broken windows were patched haphazardly with boards and tattered sheets, barely keeping out the elements. The streets were littered with garbage and discarded scraps. The outskirts seemed deserted and desolate, with only a few stray figures huddled in doorways, seeking shelter from the storm. The sound of distant thunder rumbled through the air, a low, foreboding growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest itself. The flickering firelight pouring out of the buildings cast eerie, distorted shadows onto ground. The rain started to fall, first as a gentle drizzle, then rapidly growing into a torrential downpour. The water beat against the rooftops, creating a cacophony of splashes and drips. The once dry ground turned into a muddy quagmire, making each step a struggle. The weather meant he couldn't use the rooftops to cut through, but he still counted it as a blessing. From time to time, Cassandra would cough and spit, but the storm was at least bringing her back to consciousness. He could feel her body returning control over itself, and before much longer he heard her quietly say, "I'm all right now, please put me down," which he did on the spot, but he kept one hand extended ready for her to steady herself if she needed. She didn't. The walk to the guild was uncomfortable for him. Normally he couldn't stop himself from talking, but now the sound of clouds bursting forth tendrils of lightning was all that could be heard. He waited for Cassandra to tell him anything about what just happened, but she never said a word the entire way. After entering the guild he takes her to find a quiet place to talk, before finally asking her. What happened there? The forest was worse than usual today, it's nothing. The look he gives her says that he doesn't believe what she's saying. I just took a new path, I can avoid it. Don't worry Hales, please. Fine, but do we gotta get you to Shulosmere? She should take a look at you at least. No. Is Kilornson waiting for me? That's one way to put it, if by waiting, you mean throwing a tantrum and flipping things upside down. Good. My mom says that people are easier to fight when they're mad and you're not. Does that include people with fists the size of a watermelon? I think she might adjust her sage wisdom with a few more bits of intel, kid. More to hit when someone's bigger than you, Hales. I just have to worry about getting caught. You're pretty confident, huh? Well good, because I'm gonna have to go find Yez, and she's gonna flip out when she hears what's going on. And I'm not saying shit about all that with the forest. You're gonna have to pipe up when you're ready. Just tell her it was my decision, she'll understand. So, your friend is the reason Lawson's been throwing things around. Hey, Mittens, where have you been hiding? Come on Hales, you know I hate when you call me that. It's the first day, so I was out taking count of the new faces. Since when did uncles put you to work? Yesterday you were still a chubby little baby running around without a diaper. Hey Cassandra, he used to be so cute. When he was real little we let him pick his own name, so for a while he named himself after the cat that hung around chasing the actual rats. I was like 5 years old. Yeah, well, some things shouldn't change. Is your sister around? Rin's talking to uncles, trying to get him to do something about Lawson. Damn. Alright, let me check in with her, then I'm gonna head out. The rooftops are drying off so it shouldn't take long to spot Yez. Don't get going until I get back. I wanna see you wipe the floor with him. Until then, just hide out. Got it. Yeslen came by, looking for you two earlier. She said she's going to try to get some work in, so I expect she'll be somewhere around sunlight. She forgot the time we were supposed to meet up again. I should have guessed. Thanks, Old Man Marbles. Heading up a narrow set of stairs and to the balcony which overlooks the courtyard, Hales finds who is looking for. Your little brother is getting too big. What is wrong with you? I've been getting more sentimental in my old age. You know I'm talking about Cassandra. She's 3 years younger than Marbles and you'd pit her against him, she says as she points over the balcony to the large man down below. You guys have her collecting in Hightown. She wants to be part of the important stuff. Uncles won't risk it. If anything crazy happens and her stone goes red, you know how big of a problem that'll be. And if it's true that her mother takes command of her training, then what happens to the guild if she's hurt or killed? That won't happen. It won't, because uncles want Lawson to end the fight as quickly as possible. When he wins, she has to stop getting involved when we tell her to stay out of something. What happens when the kid wins? You're serious. You haven't seen her in a scrap, Rin. The kid almost looks bored if there ain't more than 5 guys trying to kick our ass at once. She could do a lot of good around here, too. Put her to work. I could get my shit done in half the time with her watching my back. Maybe then I'd have time to ask you out properly. Properly? Oh no. No. You're not going to distract me. If she can beat Lawson, then uncles will consider putting her to work. They want to talk to her mother, too. Getting a word with her ma won't be possible, but I might be able to get us a table at Rezian up in Hightown. When the kid beats up your brute, I'll come by to pick you up around third moon. Fine, but it won't happen. And when Lawson wins, you will swear to stop picking on Marbles. Done. But one more thing. It's never ending with you. What else? When I get back, you got to keep Yes out of the fight. I didn't want her here at all, but the kid wants her to see. If she hits me, I'm going to take it out on you tenfold. She won't, trust me. Now I have to check in on your champion down there. He's not in the mood for your jokes, Hales. Everyone needs to lighten up. I'll talk to you later, Rin. Kilaunson's mocking laughter fills the courtyard. Ulran, I told you they wouldn't change their minds, so where is the child? Hales, I know you're here, where is your warrior? It's not time yet, old man. She'll show up. Will you use weapons? You're taking this joke too far, Hales. I won't hold back, you understand that, right? Weapons, Lawson. Do you need one or not? It would be embarrassing to hear you bitch and moan after she slices you to ribbons. You looking to cross me too, Hales? Of course not, our styles don't really match up very well. Can't throw a knife unless someone's back is turned. Coward. Exactly. So to confirm, you'll be weaponless, and she can use whatever she wants. She can ride in on the back of a flaming sheer beast for all I care. Yes. Let her use whatever she wants. I'll let her know, but I'm just saying, that's a pretty dumb idea, old man. I'm tired of your mouth, Hales. If I see your face one more time before the girls, I'm going to twist the head off your body. That's all I needed to know, hang tight. I'll be back and then you can have at it. With that, Hales heads out of the guild by taking the route partly upwards to Hightown, but he jumps off onto the rooftops, a few meters into his ascent. He heads towards sunlight, which isn't a place as much as the literal spot in the city where the sun is currently shining. He catches her standing at the opening of an alleyway, wet from the rains, and looking thoroughly irritated. He lets himself down behind her, far enough that she wouldn't hear him. He crouches down, slowly moving up in back of her. Chapter 6. Big Sister. People can be so stupid sometimes, Yeslen thinks. She stands at the entrance of a dimly lit, dead-end alleyway, shrouded in shadows as she observes the residents of the slums bustling about. The humidity weighed heavily upon the air, clinging to the packed dirt street and enhancing the earth-laced odors of urine and blood. The recent rainfall only seemed to worsen the stench, and Yeslens' clothes clung uncomfortably to her breasts and legs, drenched in a mixture of sweat and the oppressive moisture in the air. The slums were no place for outsiders, but everyone had their reasons for venturing into this derelict corner of the city. Yeslen couldn't fathom their motives, but they all appeared the same to her, marked by their smiles or the fact that they smiled at all. It was evident they sought an escape, and today, that fact bothered her more than usual. The night before had been troublesome, and she had to slip out of her client's home without payment. Just as well, she supposed. It was a dull night and she thought she would enjoy a bit of a scene, but she was in no mood for a fight. In jumping out of a window, she had forgotten her money on the table next to his bed. Still, no matter what happened at home, he will come back. She has no monitor to protect her during work, but no client would know that. Kiveld would be more concerned with the guild stepping in to collect her earnings, than with his wife's anger. Though she was unaffiliated, fear of the guild was enough to keep most people honest. She did find it a little surprising, as most couples would be open about picking up a woman like herself. It's a regular occurrence for a client to involve their partner, and it usually meant that she could stay the night without fear of someone smashing her head in, during a jealous fit of rage. But now, her ears pick up the conversation of strangers to the slums, and it was enough to make the last of the night's memories evaporate from her mind. "This is utterly revolting," a young man grumbled to his companion. The man gripped his arm and pulled him closer, whispered loudly, "Are you insane? Keep that to yourself, or we'll never make it out of here." Oscillating between smiling at every beggar with a foolish grin and casting serious glares at his partner, he hissed, "I don't understand why you insist on being here." Yeslen had overheard this conversation before, and she noticed that others had also taken notice. She had to act swiftly, lest they get scooped up. If they were lucky they may have a great time, but the chances were also just as good, that their bodies will be left discarded in the vicinity. As she began to approach the two men, she experienced a surge of emotions. Surprise washed over her, quickly giving way to fear, and then, in the blink of an eye, annoyance. There was only one person who would flip her ponytail over her head, causing it to smack against her forehead with an audible slap. She turned to face a freckled, 16-year-old boy, his face reddened from the effort of stifling his laughter. With all her might, Yeslen unleashed a punch, the white stone on her wrist catching the light of the rising sun, briefly casting a neon glow as it streaked through the air. The boy tumbled backward, landing on his backside, clutching his face but continuing to howl with laughter despite the filth seeping into his clothes. "What the fuck, Hales?" Yeslen screamed in frustration. "Those two will only bring you trouble," Hales replied, picking himself up and brushing off his clothes. With a wave of his hand, the dirt slid off him, leaving him looking clean despite the truth of his odor. "That first one is looking for a man named Hellas, and I suppose he brought a gift from back home to join the fun. If you tried to pick him up for the day, you would just scare him off and ruin someone else's chances for a good meal. Besides," the boy continues, "Cassandra's over at the guild, and the kid's been wanting to see you." The next burst of venom that was about to release from her lips, caught in her throat at the mention of their mutual friend. "You know what it means if she's around, so the best you can do is get cleaned up and go to her," he says. Yeslen hugs the smelly, annoying young man and silently lets him lead the way. For Yeslen, seeing Cassandra was more important than a full stomach or a warm bed for the night. When that kid was around, she would make sure that nothing would ever hurt her, and she knew that Hales felt the exact same way. The courtyard was washed in the bright light of the high noon sun. Vines clung to the stone walls, their emerald leaves dancing in the gentle breeze. Yeslen burst into yard, but before she could catch a glimpse of Cassandra, strong hands restrained her. The area was hushed, save for the distant chirping of birds and the faint rustling of leaves. The air was thick with anticipation, as if it held its breath, aware of the impending clash. Yeslen's heart hammered in her ears, drowning out the ambient sounds. Elran stood before Yeslen, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't let you interrupt," Elran murmured, her voice laced with a hint of regret. "Lawson says the kid's been stealing the jobs he's assigned," Elran continued. "At first, I thought he was being stupid," Elran confessed, "but I'm kinda starting to think there's actually something going on." Her gaze shifted toward the distant figure of Lawson, a man consumed by frustration and anger. He paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. Even the kid seems pissed, oooone added, her voice trailing off. But you know she doesn't talk to any of us. Ooowane's voice grew softer as she divulged more. He goes out to collect, and everyone says that kids already come by, she whispered, uncles just laugh at him, too. Everyone knows nobody would lay a hand on her, but after this last time, he kinda snapped. The tension in the air was palpable, suffusing every corner of the courtyard as Cassandra locked eyes with Lawson. Their contrasting sizes alone created an awe-inspiring sight, the imposing figure of Lawson casting a shadow over Cassandra, who stood resolute and unyielding. With each passing moment, Lawson's agitation seemed to intensify, manifesting in the violent sounds of chairs crashing against the walls of the courtyard. Clear the fuck out then. Lawson's voice boomed, reverberating through the courtyard. The force of his words struck like thunder, lashing out with a mix of anger and frustration. He towered over Cassandra, his presence an attempt to assert dominance. She's agreed, uncle's agreed, so what right do you have to interfere? He mocked, his voice dripping with contemptuous sarcasm. A sinister smile twisted across his face. Do you want to take her place? The courtyard trembled under the weight of his words, a charged atmosphere that threatened to explode at any moment. Lawson's rage escalated, each syllable a venomous lash at Cassandra's character. The sound of his voice roared through the air, shattering the fragile peace that remained. In the midst of the chaos, Yeslens pushed past oooone, her determination overpowering any fear that gripped her heart. She broke free just in time to witness the culmination of Lawson's wrath. You sure you don't wanna run while you can? This is gonna hurt more than your pride, old man. But Lawson has had enough. With one hand he lifts Hales above the ground and throws him through the air, hurtling directly towards Yeslens with a terrifying velocity. Time seemed to slow as Hales passed through the air, a projectile on a collision course with Yeslens. The crashing sounds of destruction faded into the background, replaced by the rushing wind and the pounding of her heart. Yeslens' eyes widened in shock, her body instinctively preparing to react, her mind racing to find a solution in the face of imminent danger. Now, in a moment of fury, Hales was flung through the air like a helpless doll. Yeslens' mind raced, the seconds slipping away, leaving her with little time to prevent the impending collision. Her heart yearned to intervene, to avert the calamity about to unfold. But with each passing moment, the inevitability of the collision became clear. Yeslens braced herself, her arms outstretched, desperately attempting to catch Hales in midair. Her eyes briefly flickered to oooone, who rolled her eyes in a gesture of exasperation. Yet, Elrond's hand rose, a command of, enough, whispered into the air. As if responding to Elrond's directive, Hales' body seemed to lose all forward momentum. Time seemed to hold its breath as he tumbled to the ground, limbs splayed out in a graceless descent. A pained groan escaped his lips upon impact, his body crumpling against the unforgiving floor. Yeslens, in a display of reflexes and determination, had managed to break his fall, sparing him from further harm. The sinking feeling in her stomach was starting to alleviate, a mix of relief and concern flooding her senses. She knelt beside Hales, her eyes wide, as a fresh sensation began to arise. Hales, despite having been thrown about 6 meters, seemed his usual upbeat self. Everything's under control, don't freak out, I just didn't think he'd throw me. Don't give me that look, The rest of his words were cut off as Yeslens grabbed his neck with both hands and pinned him to the ground, her eyes ablaze with anger. Through choked words, he managed to croak, it was her gag * idea. All at once the grip on his neck released, and though not yet willing to let Hales stand, Yeslens was at least confused enough to listen before she murders her old acquaintance. You better explain and make it short, Hales. If she gets hurt, but at this, Hales cut in. More than just his usual light tone washed away, as though it was never there. His entire manner of speaking changed, replaced by one whose sound reminded Yeslens of a body being dragged over wet rocks, or the sound a man would make after his throat had been cut. She'll outlive us both, you know that. For a moment his expression was that of alarm, but after a glance around he coughed a few times before resuming his previous facade. Just relax, Yes. The kid feels like she's being treated like a kid, and she wants to show that she's not like the rest of the rats, who only line up for a meal. She doesn't belong here, Hales. She's got friends, and a home, a family, but she stopped. Yeslen didn't mean to say the last words and she dropped her eyes in apology. I'm sorry. All right, I get it. But why did you have to let her pick a fight with the largest, ugliest brute in the city? Hales laughed and flashed his toothy, childish grin. It's not that bad. There are others here who hate the kid, you know we take all sorts. Long as they follow the rules while here, nobody cares what you've done elsewhere. But even among that lot, nobody with sense would bother Lawson. Worse yet is that he's been kinder than most to her, as it seems she reminds him of his late son. But all that kindness seemed to really piss her off. Finally she came up to me, pointed him out, then shoved her fist in my face. I sort of got the idea and now, she gets her shot. You're a tiny, harmless little shit. Hey, you fat ass, it's not very nice to insult people. And everyone knows that a tiny matchstick can burn down a whole forest, right kid? It rains constantly, you simpleton. For a moment, a tiny smile curled its way onto the corners of her mouth. Her mother had told her that, and she in turn said it once, years ago to Hales. Lawson is missing the point, she thinks. Just kick him in the balls, kid. Shut the fuck up, Hales. He looks down and Cassandra is gone. He feels a sharp sting, and notices a small slice across his left thigh. She's been prepared to fight while Lawson had allowed Hales to distract him. He wonders if that was planned or if he's really gotten so old and irritable. The cut wasn't deep, though it could have been if she had wished it. From the sidelines, Hales says, "Pay better attention next time, old man." Lawson's eyebrow twitches as the insult followed his own thoughts. For a second his mind wanders off to a world where that idiot Hales could read minds. It isn't a magic he's ever heard of, but he indulged in this bubble of thought as though he was morbidly curious as to what that would be like. But quick as the thought entered his mind, he snapped back to the fight at hand. No one could notice the change, but in that second, Lawson had stepped into a new level of consciousness. He sighs deeply before speaking. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I have to admit that I really must be getting on in years, I suppose. He laughs in good humor and swings his arm back, far faster than Cassandra had expected he could move. He had only caught her guard with the tips of his outstretched fingers, but it was enough to knock her a foot into the air. As she landed backwards onto the side of her shoulder, the momentum allowed her to roll over to her stomach and push herself upright in a smooth motion, but his response was now noted in her mind. A direct punch wouldn't be pleasant, but she thinks she may be able to withstand it. She'll continue to test him, she decides. The guild had to know what she is capable of, if they were going to let her work with them. He looks at Cassandra with renewed interest. So that's your secret. As the battle commenced, Lawson charged forward, relying on his brute strength and sheer size to overpower his diminutive opponent. His massive fist swung through the air with bone-crushing force, aimed to shatter anything in their path. The room reverberated with the thunderous impact of each missed blow as the child's agility allowed her to swiftly evade the impending danger. Darting and weaving with incredible speed, Cassandra displayed a remarkable finesse and an innate ability to anticipate her opponent's movements. Her eyes never left Lawson, searching for openings in his defense. With each step, she maneuvered gracefully, evading the thunderous strikes by a hair's breadth. As the battle intensified, Cassandra unleashed her calculated plan. With precision and grace, she took out her small blue knife, holding it like an extension of her own hand. She swiped time and time again, executing each strike with a lethal combination of speed and accuracy. Each cut leaving behind vivid red marks on Lawson's colossal frame. Though lacking in physical stature, Cassandra's resolve was unyielding. Her attacks, infused with a potent mix of conviction and strategy, found their mark with astonishing accuracy. The red marks began to multiply, spreading across the large man's body like a macabre canvas. The giant, previously confident in his invincibility, now bore the evidence of his impending defeat. With each passing moment, Cassandra's silent persistence began to unravel the large man's confidence. The once dominant figure started to falter, his movements growing sluggish, as the relentless blows took their toll. The crowd, initially mesmerized by the spectacle, now held their breath in anticipation of the inevitable outcome. Finally, in a moment of crescendo, Cassandra executed a final, decisive blow. The knife, guided by unwavering focus, left a deep red gash across the large man's chest. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of the large man's collapsing body, hitting the ground with a thunderous thud. Cassandra stood there, blood-smeared and victorious, her eyes betraying neither triumph nor remorse. Her silent expression spoke volumes that now, they would finally take her seriously. And with that, Cassandra moved past Lawson's unconscious body. She walked past Hales with his cheers and applause, past Yeslens, with her boiling anger visible on every inch of her, and out into the night, to make her way back home. As she makes her way past the last few houses that mark the outskirts of the city, Cassandra sees a figure standing in her path. Oooone would never be a good thief, she thought, for he was the only possible person who could cut that form into the night. She hoped for a better fight than their last. "You're a great fighter. I'd have my own son pledge himself to you, had he lived. But he feeds the worms now, child. I only hope to explain something to you that I never had a chance to explain to him." And without another sound, this hulking brute, this mountain of a man, completely vanished. Cassandra didn't know what to do, her mind reeling for some way to comprehend what just happened. Before she could even turn, she felt a massive hand wrap itself around her waist. The grip was unrelenting, and she clawed and bit at Lawson with all her might. He picked her up and held her firm, but with care. Had he wished, she could have been crushed like no more than a bug, and once that realization took its hold, she relaxed. "I understand," she said softly. "You can talk," he said, placing her carefully back onto the ground. "Of course you can," he murmured to himself. "Do you know what I did?" She shook her head, indicating that she did not. "Child, use your eyes. Have you ever seen a human as big as me?" Again she shook her head as to say no. Oooone sighed in exasperation. "Go home. Think. When you return, find a man at the libraries in Old Town named Bemis. He may try your patience, but ask him your questions. The man is incapable of lying." Cassandra nodded. She had much to think about, and the questions seemed to explode like floodwaters bursting down the barriers. Oooone had already begun walking back into town, but Cassandra needed him for one more moment. "What now?" he asked, impatiently, as he felt a tug on his coat. But then, his entire body seized as though he had been impaled with a knife. She had hugged him for no more than a second before running away towards the forest. He stood there watching the mere moments it took for the darkness to consume her, then allowed himself for just a few minutes, to really remember how great it felt to be a father. Chapter 7. Memories. It was a rare night. The storms had raged with an intensity not seen in decades, and from Mid to Hightown, the power had gone out. It would be lost for days, as the machinists struggled to understand the process of restarting the energies they relied on. Only the residents of Lowtown were prepared, never able to enjoy the luxury of whatever powered the tools and street lamps of the towns above. They wouldn't much notice the difference were it not for the stars, that would normally be obscured. Tonight, the tiny points of light bathed the slums in the glow, illuminating the streets and buildings in a soft orange hue. The residents would remember it as a time when their surroundings might be mistaken for being quite beautiful, for even the persistent stench of filth seemed more bearable. An old woman walked alone through the winding alleyways, her eyes scanning every small nook and cranny. She moved slowly, unconcerned as parents grabbed the young and retreated into their homes, slamming the door shut and rolling down the cloth sheets that made up their windows as soon as they saw her approach. They were quite right to be wary of her. In fact, she was a monster in their eyes, a lingering relic of a more vicious time on the world of Feor, and while usually mistaken in the details of their rumors, they were not so terribly far from the truth of it, so their behavior offered no offense. There were whispers that she would consume the young in a soup in order to extend her time on Feor, and that she could melt the skin from your bones with a word, among other tales of similar madness. Absolute nonsense, for she ate no flesh from either human or beast and was never capable of controlling the wisps of magic that remained. More accurately, had she wanted to render a person to nothing more than a puddle of melted remains, she would blow a dust made from a mixture of crushed beetles and various forest plants. Such a concoction was indeed contained within one of the many pockets of her clothing, and so she was willing to forgive a few inaccuracies. And tonight, she was certainly in search of an ingredient to assist in her work. She leaned gently upon her gnarled wooden cane as she moved, her bare feet sloshing through the muck. The night was young and her instincts pulled her forward with meandering intention. Her task could only be completed upon such a night, for her eyes struggled when the artificial lights from above intensified the darkness of the slums, but with no small amount of surprise and good humor, her sense of smell was what allowed her to find that with which she sought. Someone close by did not belong here. The smell was of the farmlands beyond the mountain, a place whose people kept to the simple and quiet existence of self-preservation. It was a smell of hay and manure, of animals and a hot bath infused with scented oils. She follows it but a short distance down a path, crowded with discarded boxes and littered with the trash and debris that the rains had failed to wash away. A tiny gasp gave away the source of the smell she followed, and she lifts a pile of smelly sheets over the head of a shivering and filthy little girl. Well, what do we have here? A pretty little rat, perhaps? No, not a rat at all. You seem much too helpless to come from above. Leave me alone. I may, though you'd do better to listen to my offer. I'm in need of someone just like you. I will ensure you live in exchange for quite a bit of pain. You do wish to live, or am I mistaken? The girl nods as tears begin to well within her eyes. Enough. I care not for tears. Do not overwhelm yourself. This place will treat you far worse, and you may yet grow to overcome your discomfort under my care. To master it. What do I have to do? Nothing difficult, simply listen and do as instructed. Exactly, as instructed. I am Leorza, and who might you be? I presume you've not chosen your name, so out with the truth of yourself. My name is Yeslen, she says, wiping her face but leaving a streak of wet dirt in place of her tears. Why me? Consider yourself lucky, no more reason than that. Eat this, it will give you strength to walk. We have a ways to go to my home and I'd not have you collapse upon the path. The young girl takes the brownish lump from the woman's hands. It has an unpleasant odor, but she bites into it without question. I've no talent for cooking, but it is far from poison. That would have been my own dinner. Through a grimace, she looks into the old woman's eyes and thanks her. It tastes horrid, the look on your face tells all. Do you know how to do better? I can cook a little bit. You can, she says, her eyes brightening. No need to gobble you up in a pinch then. You're joking. You don't look like you could chew through a pudding. The old woman snatches back the awful clump of food and takes a bite for herself before pressing it back into the child's hands. As a snarl of displeasure from the taste curls upon her lips, she says, You have spirit. Good. I fear your attitude may make for rotten company once you grow a bit, but I'm nearing fatigue and will take what I can. The child tries to muster up a smile, but looks to the ground. She wasn't ready yet for such emotions. The old woman had spoken of pain, but there was also something about her that felt safe. And the possibility to master the pain intrigued her. Answer. Together they walked out of the alleyways and past the residents with their scared looks. This woman was no one to reckon with, and that, more than anything else, made her confident she had made the right choice. There would be pain, but there would also be life. And suddenly the latter was what she finally looked forward to. 9 years later. Yeslen, please, just hear me out. I don't have time, oooone. You know I have to find somewhere to settle in for the night, hopefully before it rains again. That's what I'm wanting to talk about. She stops and turns to face him, a large smile plastered across her face. He catches up to her and places a small kiss upon her cheek. It wasn't what she wanted, but he always seemed to veer on the side of cautiously respectful towards her. It was part of what made him stand out. If you insist on kissing me like that, I'm going to have to rethink our relationship. She says, before closing her eyes and pressing her lips together in an exaggerated pout, puffing her cheeks out and awaiting his response. He places both hands softly against her cheeks and tries again. This time, much to her satisfaction, until he says, "I suppose we both have to work on it." That was like kissing a very beautiful fish. She pushes his shoulder as she scoffs at the comment, but her smile remains. "You're lucky you're so cute. What did you come down here to say? Come back with me to Midtown." Her entire demeanor changes. She didn't know what she expected him to say, but it wasn't that. "My family will love you. We don't have to mess around or anything. I just can't stand you living down here in the rain and muck. If you come to find your feelings for me have changed, then I would still want to see you happy, regardless. I would wear out my welcome quickly." "You wouldn't. My father is a bit of a hard ass, but if you help out with the work, he will treat you like a daughter. We need the help too. My mother even wants to meet you. I've told her a lot about you." "What have you said?" "That you're smart and beautiful and, I dunno, I've told her tons. Just give it a shot. If we head up now we can probably beat the rains." She had wanted to say yes. The words were forming on her lips, but it was already too late. His body was lifted into the air as something wrapped itself around his throat. 2 large spots of blood appeared on his chest, his right hand reaching for Yeslen, but she could do nothing but watch as he was ripped apart in front of her. Answer, she ran, fleeing back down into the winding alleyways, until she reached a dead end. Her eyes were wide open and desperately searching for whatever it was that had killed him. It was still there, but she couldn't see it at all. A shout of, "What the fuck are you doing here?" rang down the alleyway as a young boy yelled from atop a building. He jumped down to stand in front of her. He was about to tell her to leave, that this was guild territory, but he immediately understood that something wasn't right. Whoa, are you okay?" he asked, with his hands raised in a placating gesture. Her whole body trembled as she stammered, "Sheer beast. Oh, fuck." The sound of the air leaving his lungs was what she heard next. He was struck hard and thrown against a building, his head smacking against the wall and leaving a bloody trail to the ground where he lay. And then it began to rain. Her and Oooone were marked for death tonight. It wouldn't bother killing this new boy until she was dealt with. But now, she could see its form clearly. The outline of something akin to a panther was taking its time now, enjoying the final moments of its hunt. It lowered its head, raising its 3-pronged tail to deliver the final strike, but a knife now stuck out of its side. "I got its attention. Try to get the fuck out of here, lady." The young boy was in bad shape. One side of his face was bleeding heavily and he was leaning against the wall for support, but he stood and smiled. She would never want to forget that impossible smile, but he was going to die. They both were. The beast used its tail to remove the knife, and throws it with incredible speed towards the boy, who narrowly avoids it. He was too injured to move much more and there was nowhere to go. The beast was now running towards him, all intentions to stalk its prey lost to the frenzy from being stabbed. He goes to take a step but falls to his knees onto the mud. Yeslen sank to the ground, all hope lost as she awaited her turn to die. But then, a child's scream filled the alleyway. A little girl had leapt onto its back and began stabbing it over and over with a sharpened blue stick. She stabbed into its eyes, and clamped her teeth around its neck, ripping away chunks of its flesh. It howled in pain, then fell silent. Dead. Such was the manner in which they met 6-year-old Cassandra. The young man would be collected by the guild while the small child would help Yeslen bury the remains of her friend. Cassandra would stand in the background as Yeslen delivered the news to his family. They never blamed her. The attack was one of Theo's cruel jokes that could happen at any time to anyone. They even invited her into their home, but Yeslen declined. She blamed herself for his death, even if they wouldn't. He never would have been there if not for her. Answer, Yeslen changed. Chapter 8. Lost and Found. Cassandra had never been to this part of the city before, and her mind strained to recall if anyone had mentioned it, but she came up lacking. Even so, with half of their faces torn to bits, the remains of the buildings were still taller than anything she's ever seen before. Through the sheer wonder of seeing buildings 6 to 7 layers upon themselves, Cassandra felt a kind of melancholy. She had almost died yesterday, and even if she wasn't hurt, she underestimated Yeslens. So really, she comes to see that twice in one day, she could have become no more than a memory. It doesn't matter the way you think it does, her mother's voice echoed into her mind. Right now, you're still alive and given a chance to prevent making the same kinds of mistakes. Cassandra smiles at the recounting of a time, training with her mother. I lost a baby tooth learning that one. I wanted so badly to be like you, to impress you, that I tried surprising you with a new attack, and ended up knocking myself out when I flipped off a barrel and landed on my face, she reminds herself. It was painful and embarrassing, but you never let me give up. The memory was also special for another reason, because on that same night, she woke up to see that Yeslens had nearly been killed at some point during the day. She hated seeing her mother throw herself into his care, but to know that others wanted him gone was its own kind of satisfaction. Coming out of her thoughts, she can see a rounded central building rising into her view. There must have once been pristine lettering on the building, but though most were gone, there was enough left to let her know she was headed to the right place. Only a few minutes now, but it seemed unlikely anyone would be there. Why would they? With no food, no shelter, and no defenses, this place felt better suited as a burial ground. It was like a war had been fought here, for everywhere she looked the buildings were shattered. At times she thinks she can see someone within the ruins, but it's never more than soot and ash playing tricks with their shapes upon the walls, in a gruesome rendition of silent theater. There were far fewer people here than the streets of her slums, where even nighttime was alive with work and pleasure amid their meager efforts to survive. Here, there was desolation. The air, previously thick with sodden earth interchanging with the smells of life on Fior, the fruit and flower vendor's stall or the meat being cooked in open air, all of it was replaced by the smell of somewhere long decaying, forgotten. Now having passed into dust. Rah! She shouts, but though her voice echoed down the empty street, there was no flight of birds or creatures scrambling for safety. Just strange looks from the few that moved about, and she continues on in silence, unsure of what to expect. Piles of books are scattered atop the steps, with more spilling out into the street. Those that lay in the dirt have become so beaten by weather and time, that the slightest disturbance would cause them to crumble into nothing. As she approaches the entrance, the books start to improve in quality. With faded artwork and words now clear across the cover, she stops to examine a few. There were plenty of books on the shelves at home, and her mother used a few to teach Cassandra the basics of reading and writing. The one that most caught her interest was handwritten, the text a sloppy scrawl, as though the author cared more for the content than its legibility. Connecting the small, clear characters of her mother's script during their lessons, to the swirling misshapen, and often, misspelled words in the book took years, but it was immeasurably useful. It was within the pages of that book that she first learned how to fight. The author began by explaining how he suffered a horrible accident, and believed he would never again be able to teach others about the ancient art he inherited. But in his writing he found a source of strength in himself, and while each page was filled with rudimentary illustrations and descriptions of combat, it was the decision to keep believing in himself that allowed him to overcome his mental and physical limitations. But the other books never seemed quite so useful to Cassandra. Made-up stories of talking creatures or invincible heroes frustrated her, and the idea of a happy end for no one but the protagonist was insulting. There had been members of the guild, people just like Hales and Yeslens, who struggled each day to get through to the next, but ended up dead in the mud along with their best intentions. Cassandra, Mr. Stevens, Miss Jansen, Shulanta, the names of those in the guild who've cared for her over the years, now a bitter reminder that there are no invincible heroes on Fior. Among them, Cassandra was the most painful. A girl about Cassandra's age, no matter how much she tried to ignore her, she had a remarkable talent for making Cassandra laugh. It was the relentless pestering and objectively bad jokes that sprung forth without end. The guild was in an uproar when they learned she was taken during a red night. Uncles were furious like never before. She was sweet and kind, but it didn't matter. After her 11th birthday, her stone changed from white to red, and she was taken anyway. No book of comfortable fantasies at home would be enough for Cassandra to believe that Cassandra would have a happy ending. With the rest, Cassandra had seen the bodies at the very least. She knew they all fought and she knew the way they met their end. But not knowing at all about Kishali left the wound open to fester. But that was enough for Cassandra. There may be answers here, and she had lingered in painful memories for long enough. Shaking her head to clear away her thoughts, she enters the doorway into the building, slightly amused that it still remained while the building surrounding it had been blown away countless years ago. Regardless, it felt improper to enter in any other way. The building was vast, and once inside she could see that large portions of it had remained intact, while other areas seemed to show signs of repair. The silence here was oppressive, as though the building itself, with its dry dusty air, wanted nothing more than to rob her of her voice. But the further in she got, the more certain she became that she in fact, was not alone here. It was a curious sound, like a conversation in one's mind that escaped their mouth in unintelligible bits and pieces. It didn't take long for Cassandra to follow it to its source, and turning a corner she finds who she is looking for, without a doubt in her mind. Set amongst the books and sitting on the ground, the old man with tousled dark hair and a scraggly moustache looked like no one she had ever seen before. It wasn't his worn-out clothing or glasses, that were so thick they magnified his eyes to comical proportions, but the fact that he seemed wholly unconcerned with anything beyond the book in his hands. She stood right before him for minutes, going so far as to clear her throat with a loud, hum, but still no reaction. Any normal resident of the city would have at least asked who she was, or what she wanted. Not the mention who she may be with, was she armed, etc. But it would appear that Cassandra's presence was no more to this man than the flickering of a candle. You, she began, but the old man nearly jumped out of his skin. The book in his hands leapt up, knocked his glasses askew as he grasps at his chest in alarm. What? He manages to stammer out. Are you the Bemis that Mr. Kilornson told me to find? Young lady, the word key can mean Mr. or Miss, depending on with whom you are speaking. But yes, I am Kibemis or Mr. Bemis as you may say. I don't mind asking you not to sneak up on me, I am very old and such tricks are not very kind. But before Cassandra could reply, a voice came from behind her. What do you want with him? Before the words, this is more like it, could fully develop in her mind, her small blue knife was out. She turned as quick as lightning, so fast that if her knife was still in her hand she would have sliced it clear across the woman's stomach, but it wasn't. Her knife was still strapped to her leg, and now the still lingering fear from the forest rose up within her. She started to back up, but there was nowhere to go. The old man, still seated on the ground, was behind her and the shelves of books towered to each side of her. She again reached for her knife, but the old man's words, laced with childish curiosity, said, "Oh child, that knife. Please won't you let me see it?" She turned, squeezing the handle of her weapon, feeling its weight and texture, and then it was gone. Kibemis held it carefully between his hands, clearly delighted, but Cassandra was thinking of nothing but trying to escape. She turned away from Kibemis, intending to push past the relatively small woman, but she was gone, though it didn't matter. Cassandra ran, leaping over piles of books and debris, but the library wasn't the same. The walls were different, they had somehow changed, and now each turn seemed to lead her back to where she sought escape. She placed her hands on a shelf, hoping to climb above them, but within the blink of her eye, she once again was facing the old man. A hand was set upon her shoulder, as the woman's stern voice filled her mind. "Calm down, you're making a mess." "What are you?" Cassandra asked, but the woman simply rolled her eyes in a deliberate display of impatience. "I'm not so terribly different from you, now sit down." But it wasn't as much of a direction, as much as Cassandra's new reality. She was in fact, now sitting. The walls of books were gone now, replaced by wooden walls. She was in a chair, with the kind of soft cushions she's seen within the guild's meeting room. Mr. Bemis, who was now dressed in a manner that wouldn't have made her look at him twice, was sitting on a bench to the side, still inspecting Cassandra's weapon. "Why does this exist?" he asked the woman, now seated before Cassandra behind the desk. The desire to escape was settling quickly within Cassandra. Logically, if they wanted to hurt her, that would have been easy. There was more here, and she was prepared to learn as much as she could. "What are you?" she asked again, this time with a controlled, quiet voice. The woman seemed to ponder the question a moment, but before she could reply the old man once again chimed in, "Where did you get this?" "From the Blue Forest." "Why?" "Because nobody but the children of that forest could shape such a thing, and they have no reason to. They make useful things, curious things at time no doubt, but things nonetheless that drive their passions. Why would they give you a blade that cannot kill? I told you I found it." "You found nothing, child." "What are you, 7, no 8 years old?" "I'm 9, my name is Cassandra, not child, and what does it matter?" Her voice now betraying her intentions to remain calm. She has had about enough of this and intends to continue but is cut off once again by the old man. "Mind your manners amongst God, child, Cassandra. It matters because your stone cannot possibly change until you're 11, so nothing in that forest would ever harm you. Not one insect or beast would," but it was Cassandra's turn to cut him off. "I want to leave. Now." This was ridiculous. "I was told to find a senile old man, by another man who must find it quite hilarious to waste my time." But at the mention of Lawson's instructions, she remembered something. When she left the guild, he was covered in deep slashes, but at their meeting by the forest, he didn't have a single scratch on him. Their fight was no more than 10 minutes past, and she could still feel her clothes were damp with his blood. But there was nothing on his skin to show for it. Her eyes drew back at the realization and she lifted her right leg to examine her ankle. She was certain that in her escape from the forest she had cut herself trying to get free, but she didn't think to inspect it when changing into her new clothes. Rolling up the leg of her pants, she finds no sign of a wound on the mend, nor anything else to indicate that anything happened at all. She was left with just the memory of how it felt to be cut. I'm sorry. So you think you understand something now, do you? What do you know?" the woman asked. Normally the tone might have put Cassandra off, but she started to feel as though her time wasn't being wasted after all. The old man had set the knife aside and was continuing on with his book, but the woman's eyes were squarely fixed upon Cassandra. "May I have the knife back now?" she asked, putting on the kindest tone she could manage, knowing that it would have made Yeslen roar with laughter. Such false displays were her specialty, after all. But these people didn't know her, and, God, must be the title for someone who can play tricks with her mind. "No dear, you're moving away from the truth. At least, since you've calmed down a bit you can remember why you came, I believe. Do you know Kilornson?" "Yes." "Oh, this is wonderful, what else would you like to know?" "Why did he say you're God?" "No, he didn't." "I most certainly did. You see, this is exactly why I say you need to build a temple, give this world a religion based on fact, That's more than what I grew up with, you know. You mustn't let them think what they want about you, it isn't proper. I don't want to discuss this again." And she didn't need to know that. "Listen, child, whatever brought you here was your choice. He and I have been here for a very long time, but we have not been waiting for you or anyone else." "I don't understand." What I mean to say. The goddess Shell, creator of your world and everything within it, is trying to say that you're not special. Or maybe you are, but not as far as she is concerned. Well yes, thank you, Bemis. That does about sum it up. I just don't want you thinking that because of this you're destined for some grand fate. You may die the moment you leave this building, but if you don't, you owe it to yourself. You're not what I would imagine a god to be like. Did you make everything or just this world?" "Just this world. I don't care for your phrasing, but yes, just this world. I'm not going to get into it with a 7-year-old. Are you trying to upset me or do you really not know how old I am? If I were to know everything about everything then there wouldn't be much point in walking around here, would there? It sounds like a perfectly good way to lose one's mind, so no. I also can't see the future, I can't bring back the dead, there's a lot I can't do as God. I may be starting to believe you. Why did Mr. Lawson send me to him?" pointing to Bemis, who held his book up close to his face in excitement over whatever it was he was reading. "You mean to say that you're really not here to speak to me?" "I just presumed, since why else would someone seek him out?" "Lawson told me I'd find knowledge here. I just have a few questions." I don't care about God or the mysteries of this world. I lost a fight that could have killed me and your forest tried to do the same. Nonsense, the old man says with a derisive bark of a laugh. So what, do you know, old man? I understand this mad woman better than I understand you. I nearly died twice, and someone else did. I saw him torn to pieces by a demon, but you act like I'm lying. Just because you don't know you're lying doesn't mean that you aren't. Child. Cassandra. Well yes, anyhow, child, your forest cannot harm you. It is a rule, and one they cannot break. You are a child with a white stone, and you're under the age where you're seen as a threat. There are many reasons why the forest would kill, but nothing is done without reason. If you're so sure of what you've seen, then explain it clearly so that I may correct you. Cassandra takes a deep breath, reminding herself that Yeslens mentioned, this man would try her patience. A man was drawn into a lake by something resembling a woman. It used a wooden puppet to cast out a false voice and lured him in. Then it tore him apart and showered in his blood. The last I saw, she was holding his heart, and it was still beating. The forest itself tried to capture me, but I escaped. Do not tell me I'm wrong. I've seen people do terrible things to survive. If she's God, then she's made a world filled with nothing but horror, fear, and suffering, and this forest demon is no different. Now explain how the sounds of the man's pain were false. Explain how there's nothing to fear when people I love are captured and killed by your creations. For that matter, explain why my father is another addition to the pile of garbage you claim to have created, because none of it makes sense. The goddess Shal has created quite a fair and balanced world, but she cannot direct the will of its people. She cannot help when people do bad things, and there are times when life on a world ends because the people destroy themselves. Some god may intervene to preserve their work, but to do so undermines the essence of freedom. It's not as though she creates a person's soul, but still, you have no idea how much work it must have taken to set the proper rules so people don't immediately start going to war over land or food or their ideas of what God actually wants. This world has smaller problems and simple solutions. I know of your so-called demon, but first I'd ask what you know about the types of people found on Feor. I didn't know. As I presumed, there are no less than 6, but you know of 3 so far. There's yourself, the giant Yeslens, and your forest demon. You have a stone on your wrist, which neither your giant or demon possess, so I'll begin with you. You may know that the stone tells the nature of your soul, yes. Yes. Those born with, or who manifest the red are meant to harm, and those who keep their white are of no danger. Excellent, but entirely incorrect. Will you be telling her everything? Will you finally build a church to teach these things? You know I can't. She sighs. Cassandra, know this. Among the near-endless worlds that bear life, Feor is rare. I share my power with you all, but I've had to separate aspects of myself between you in order to do so. If I made the smallest mistake to the balance on Feor, then more than just the people, but the world and myself could be destroyed in an instant. Your stone is part of the balance. I'm sure people often assume that your stone is anything but a pure white, despite your age. But it doesn't dictate your will or personality, though many people decide to view it that way. As Yeslens stated, I have no control over your soul. Wherever the spark of life comes from, Feor, and every other world are just beacons. Your type of people have the greatest access to my power. The stone simply states your adherence to my intentions based on your mindset and actions, but I also needed a way to identify the threat of harbingers. Souls that bring nothing but chaos are born with the red stones. Eliminating them may be the one thing your people do well. Then why does my father have 2 red stones? Shal and Bemis look to each other with expressions of concern. You're talking about impossible things, Cassandra. I'm the only one talking about things that can be proven. Time stops. Shal places a hand on Cassandra's head, forcing yesterday's image of Weslow back into her mind, and immediately recoils as time continues. You saw him, didn't you? Yes, she whispers. We have to end this conversation, go away. And with no more than a wave of her hand, Cassandra blinks, and the library setting is replaced by that of the alley behind the vendors in what could be considered the central hub of the slums. She sat for a moment, feeling the cool stone wall of the building against her back. A small panic overtakes her as she reaches for her knife, but it is once again attached to her leg. It's now nighttime and the rains are pouring down. Thankfully she sat beneath an umbrella. Next to nothing was answered, but Hales and Yeslen would have more to say about it. She should also seek out Lawson, and inform her mother about what's happened. She never explained yesterday's events to her friends, and with the forest surely flooded, she would need to head over to Yeslen's house for the night. She hates bothering her, and she'd be more than a little mortified if Yeslen were working from home, but the storm was unrelenting, and Cassandra had little choice. Off the road and tucked next to a set of stairs going up were 6 stone steps that led down. It was easy to miss, as the street was lined with rusted metal fencing. One might think the steps downward were no more than a runoff to prevent flooding. Which would be true if the enterprising homeowner hadn't stripped the pipes and created a clever little workaround. Miss Treyest was old and alone, prickly in demeanor, but most of all, she was nosy. Not in an obtrusive or terribly offensive way, Cass thinks, but she would yell information at Cassandra as though she were either in trouble or somehow had anything to do with it. I thought that sister of yours, which she knows not to be the case, would be a more exciting tenant. The walls are made of paper, yet I sleep like the dead, and tell your sister that nobody likes a mute. Cassandra doesn't dwell on it, but she knows that it has to do with the affairs of adults. Like most children, she was told about it at an early age, in the context of self-defense and the reasons to distrust people. When someone has sex, usually it's after the person has earned your complete trust. And as a rule, the children of the slums are taught that no one can be trusted. A boring topic at best for Cassandra. It's late, but thankfully there's light coming from inside, and she can hear someone laughing. A man. Knocking 3 times, she swallows hard, nervous that this was a bad time. She didn't know the person who opened the door, but immediately an oily sweet-smelling fog of spiced tobacco drove through her sinuses. Yeslen had some new company over, it seemed. About 3 men and 1 woman, she guessed from the voices coming from inside. She goes to move past the man, but he stands in her way and says, "Hey, can I help you? This is Yeslen's house, I'm her." But before she could finish, Yeslen yells over the others, "Who is it?" He turns his head and yells back, "I don't know, some kid." The confusion in the man's voice takes the nerves from out of her stomach. He doesn't seem like a bad guy, or even a tough guy. He seemed nice, she decided. A kid. Oh, is that Cassandra? Are you Cassandra? She's like my little sister dummy. Can't you see the resemblance? Oh shit, yeah, I see it now. Oh, I'm sorry kid, come on in. And don't call her kid, her name's Cassandra. Well, how was I supposed to know? He yells back to Yeslen. My bad, Cassandra, right? He says as he steps aside to let her in. She smiles and nods. Looking around, she sees 2 men she knows, and the woman as well. The twins, Lom and Drev, along with Launt, a skinny girl marked with 2 thin scars along her cheek, were the regular faces at Yeslens. Often they were there when Yeslen wasn't even home. 2 other men were sitting in the kitchen area, having a smoke with Yeslen. Can I get you a towel? Hey Yeslen, where do you keep that stuff? She knows where things are. You can use my room to change. Change. The boys brought over some of their little sister's old clothes. Don't worry, I went through and got rid of anything you'd hate. Oh, I never asked, so I want you 2 to explain to us why and how you guys got them. Our ma was gonna throw 'em out a few fades ago. Her and Graal haven't been getting along lately. She asked if we could bring 'em to the guild, but Graal would kill us if we gave them away to strangers. Yeah, better you have it. If she catches you wearing it, she'll do no more than tease you. If she decides she likes you. Otherwise run. Yeslen says you're a hellcat in a scrap, but say you win. She'll haunt you till you're old and grey, demanding another fight. Cassandra actually laughed. The clothes were unexpected enough. She's never even worn something made outside her home, but to hear the twins talk so much, caught her off guard. Today, from start to finish, was beyond her wildest imagination. It was almost absurd. They're soul cursed. Why didn't you tell me? She asked Yeslen. You're always so quiet, I figured you didn't have much interest. Before you open that box of slugs, remember that when they're in the mood for it, they'll talk for hours. And don't give in to their stupid sad faces if you have something else to do. She didn't know what to say, so she bowed her head slightly and thanked them before rushing off to Yeslen's room, leaving a sloshing muddy trail in her wake. She can hear the new guy already cleaning up. Poor guy probably has a crush on Yeslen. Not like the twins. Their friendship with Yeslen had always confused her because most men are obvious about why they want to spend time with her, but maybe she's starting to see it. She thought the twins were not the nicest of people. They had treated her indifferently, but around the slums they were known to be very dangerous. Cassandra goes to inspect the clothes and changes into her choice. During this, she starts to think that they were being kind to her for the same reason they hang out in Yeslen's tiny, cramped half-basement. She doesn't think they particularly like who they have to be when they're not here. Does this look okay? They look at Yeslen but she isn't paying attention. I think they want to ask you something. Huh, oh, I'm so fucked up right now, what's going on? I just wanted to know if it looks right, like, do I have it on okay? What exactly did you say? I said, does this look okay? Right, you have to be more direct. Look at them and say this, do you two think this looks okay? Or something like that. Wait no, that might only let them say, yes or no. Say, or I mean, ask something starting by looking at them and, thank you for the clothes, it really means a lot to me. I would like you two to please tell me how you feel about how it looks, as well as making any questions or statements that allow you to speak directly with everyone in the room without needing to be asked a question, for as long as you're here. The two men looked at her with surprise clearly written across their faces. Then, looking at each other with smiles that hardly seemed to fit their face, they began to laugh. It was as though she were tickling a baby as their laughter rang forth. Drev fell to the side onto his brother's lap, as Lom slapped at Drev's back, both entirely taken in by what Cassandra had said. Yeslen comes into the room, concerned. I'm not sure Yeslen is going to love what you just did, but... Thank you, Cassandra. Really. It takes a clever tongue to work around our situation, and most people never bother to put their minds to task over it. They both look at Yeslen and glare, though not unkindly. What the fuck just happened? You have to find a new place. Yeah, we can't even stand up all the way. What? Why are you two talking? Nobody asked you anything. Fucking shit, I didn't mean it like that. I'm such an asshole. I mean, look, I just smoked and this is a lot. You mean if I said some stuff you both could have just spoken like normal? Yup. From the floor above, a cackling howl of laughter erupts. What an idiot, ha 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 ha. Lom smiles and says, yeah. There are limitations in her words, but the girl did better than most. I'm curious how she worked it out so quickly. My mother has told me a little about various soul spells. I always thought the ones that control words were kinda fun because she would make a game of working around them. This is fantastic. Thank you, Cassandra. Your mother wouldn't happen to be available, would she? Drev. I'm just asking, brother. Any woman understanding of our condition has my interest. Cassandra laughs again. I'm sorry, but no. But I'll tell you first, if that ever changes. Love favors the bold, brother. Cassandra, I promise I would be the best father ever. Yeslen says, this is too much. Did you know about this, Launt? Yup. Be thankful the girl didn't say that they could sing. Cassandra began to open her mouth but Yeslen points towards her and says, no. Don't you dare. Break. From where they sat, the sounds of children playing could be heard, over the mix of vendors hawking their wares and dogs barking. The sun was setting and the rains were nearing the end of their season of life, so while the moisture was in the air, Wallsies, as it was known, would be the game of choice. I can't believe the kids still play that game. Did they have it when you were young, Hales? Hales takes a seat on an overturned barrel, sitting cross-legged and perfectly balanced, while Yeslen sits on the ground with her back against a building. Cassandra takes a small hand towel from out of her bag, and places it atop a small box before sitting on it. Of course. For all I know we may have played a few rounds together. I can't recall many of those old faces, just the names we all made up in case we didn't make it. What do they call you? Cassandra lowers her head, clearly a bit embarrassed. I'm Bluebird, 'cause my old clothes looked like feathers. Hales smiles and nods as Yeslens says. It's a pretty name, kids today must be kinder than I remember. Cassandra's expression brightens at the compliment. What about you two? I was Granite. No doubt named for the resemblance between your head and a stone slab. That's so mean, Yeslen. It's alright kid, Shush is actually pretty close. They said I was dumb as granite. What were you, Yes? No one could glow like Yeslen, and she used her unique expression to share exactly how she felt about this conversation turning towards herself. I can't recall. Cassandra's interest was picking up now, for maybe this time Yeslen may actually say something about her past. It didn't matter to Cassandra if Yeslen was considered a good or a bad person, but beyond what she's seen with her own eyes, Yeslen was still a mystery. And at a time like this, Hales would definitely push for information. Horse shit. It must have been good. I'm thinking crab apple or oh. I know, you a smart ass, am I right? Though Cassandra wanted to know more, she got the sinking feeling that Hales was about to get his head knocked off. Yeslen seemed about to rise up in anger, but something seemed to pop up in her mind just then. I was fine. I was thorny. In that moment it seemed as though the wind passing through the alley was the only sound available, as mere seconds seemed to stretch into an awkward infinity. And then Hales opened his mouth. Thorny. Yeslen's eyebrows furrowed and her eyes squinted as she calculated every possible response Hales could give her. Whatever it was, she was ready to go apeshit. But of course, the response would take a moment. Hales exploded with laughter to the point of falling off his barrel and landing in the bit of mud, while Cassandra clamped her hands over her mouth. Yeslen could see in her young eyes, all crinkled up at the corners, that Cassandra was really struggling to keep up her respectful and polite demeanor. Whatever fury she was about to unleash immediately melted away. Her face reddened, but the annoying way Hales laughed while he rolled in the dirt, wormed its way into her head and she couldn't help but join in on the laughter. They all needed it, and so the moment also seemed to stretch out endlessly. To be sure, there was absolutely no reason to ask why they would have named her Thorny. With a swipe of his hand, Hale's clothes became free of wet mud and dirt and he hops back up onto the barrel. That is too perfect, the one who named you was a genius, he said, wiping tears from his eyes and grinning broadly at Cassandra. He lives as far as I know. Bound to some dull woman who looks at him as though he's the source of perfection. I remember him as the one who could belch the loudest, but all the same I'm happy he made it out of here. This meant so much to Cassandra. Until now she didn't think Yeslen was the sort to join in on the ancient game, and to hear that she had some kind of friends, at least when she was little, was a huge relief. It had been 3 years since they came together, and 2 since Cassandra first spoke to them in full sentences. Most of the time was very much like this she thinks, as Yeslen and Hales would talk and bicker and laugh. But lately Yeslen has been looking skinnier, and Hales looked as though he hasn't slept in days. They were putting on their best face for her, she knows it. But nighttime would fall within a few hours, and Cassandra couldn't imagine how hard it must be for them. When they were done talking, she decided that she was going to head home. You know Yes, it almost sounds like you missed your chance. That's true. I always had a soft spot for boys who were taller than me, but I guess those sort of affections are nothing you'll ever have to worry about from anyone, Granite. Yeslen said the last with such emphasis that it sounded like a curse word. But the worried feeling Cassandra had a few minutes ago had eased up. She doesn't know what's different about today, but despite her weather state, Yeslen seemed to be in such a good mood, that Hales just didn't seem to piss her off as much. Do you see how she treats us for being short, Cassandra? I'm only 9 so I don't think I count, my mom is about Yeslen's height. Sorry Hales. Traitor. Fine, well, why don't you go on, Bluebird? Show those urchins how to really play the game. Otherwise Thorny here will tear you apart next. She seems to be in a good mood today, so I expect she won't run out cleversingers anytime soon. My mood is not the issue here. You just seem to be short on humor, Hales. Another shortcoming to add to your shortlist, I suppose. Oh wow. Hey Yes, that was so mean, he says with a mock impersonation of Cassandra, but really good. What did you think, Cassandra? I think she has a future as a traveling jokester. Cassandra. But Cassandra wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was flashing with the images of the man in the lake. The splashing as he desperately pushed on, the tears streaming down his face in relief when he thought he found his son. And then, the blood. The smell of it and the way it dried into her skin as she fled for her life. She doesn't realize that Hales was still talking until the third time he calls her name. Cassandra. Hey, are you alright? I wanted to give you some time when you came out of the forest, but then everything at the guild, and you never said anything about taking down Lawson. That's a matter we have yet to discuss, little girl. What madness drove you to challenge that? Wait, what do you mean something happened with the forest? Cassandra tries to silently express to Hales that this wasn't something she wanted to discuss just yet, but before he could see her expression, he had already begun to talk. She came running out looking really messed up, then passed out. What? I wasn't hurt. I wanted to tell you both, but a lot's happened and I just wasn't sure where to start. After I left the guild, what happened to Lawson? He was gone before anyone could notice. We were all watching you strut out and then he just wasn't there anymore. Something going on. You can tell us anything, but I'm not trying to push you. I never beat Lawson, he was just pretending. You can't be serious, he was aiming to squash you and he was a bloody mess by the time he fell. Here, look, and she hands over her knife to Yeslen. It doesn't actually cut, it will hurt and leave a bit of blood, but there's no wound. It may be wood, but anything that sharp will do some damage, kid. There's no way that. In the blink of an eye, Yeslen slides the knife over the palm of her hand without even wincing. Fresh blood begins to spread on her palm but then stops. Cassandra and Hales both jump to their feet. Are you crazy? Hales begins, but she's right. I felt it, but there's no wound. That doesn't explain why Lawson would put on such an act. Okay, great, you trust the kid's word more than I do. But don't do that again, Yes. I'm trying to figure something out, but you don't gotta risk getting hurt to prove a point. And, you know I hate seeing blood. Yeslen was about to argue, but their expressions of concern were clear. Right, sorry. But anyway, think Yes. His kid, it was a boy. I don't know what you're getting at. I thought maybe he was just a big guy, but if he's really a giant type, it explains a lot. Giants can't stand it if unarmed women or children get hurt. It's not just a code of honor, it's their curse. That's why certain groups will employ a few to keep some level of peace during battle or a raid. But it's also a nasty tactic. What's wrong with them protecting the innocent? It doesn't sound like a curse. If they see blood from an innocent, they succumb to a madness. Kid, when they go into a rage, friend or foe doesn't matter. They'll kill anyone with a weapon. They can't stop themselves, and if they survive the berserk state, they remember everything that happened. Outside of war they're all about family and peace, so it really messes them up. On top of that, his boy had a 50-50 chance of being born as a giant type. I know he lost his family in a red raid, but that probably factors into it. At 11 years old, the curse takes full effect, there's no choice in it. If the mother was killed in front of them, they'd both lose themselves in an instant. Lawson would be too much to handle when that happens, but his kid would be in over his head. The old magic may be gone, but for some reason, most types besides ours can still access a chunk of it. Everyone with stones are just regular people who have a chance to become a world-ending monster, far as anyone knows. So no matter what, Lawson wouldn't have hurt Cassandra. Well, yes and no. The curse has exceptions, and while normally a kid wielding a knife wouldn't register as a threat, someone like her may be seen as more warrior than child. Otherwise people would definitely use children to kill giants who couldn't fight back. I'm hoping I'm off the mark. I don't like thinking that someone like him would have gone through such horrible stuff. That fight with the kid aside, he's always tried to help everyone out around here. Was there anything else? What happened in the forest? Tell me everything. I saw a man get killed by a demon in a lake, then it came after me. I ran until I got out of the forest, and that's when Hales found me. After the fight, Lawson stopped me before I could head home. He showed me his power and had me beat in just a few seconds. Then he told me to go to a library to get answers, and that's where I met God, earlier today. Her name is Shal. She spoke in riddles then sent me back into town with a wave of her hand, but that's how I found out the knife doesn't cut. And now I'm here. Silence. Going over what she just said in her mind, Cassandra suddenly felt as though some of the details could have been told with a bit more tact. Demons and God weren't things people spoke about outside of stories, but it was too late now, so she continued. And there was an old man who came from another world alongside Shal, that's God, whose name was Bemis. Oh. And when Lawson attacked me the second time, his body grew to the size of a house. I wish you had my sense of humor, kid. I really wanna think you're pulling my leg but you've never cracked a single joke in all the years we've known ya. I'm gonna need some time to chew on what you just said, but that's later. Don't bullshit me, kid. Are you okay? She's stronger than you think, Hales. Shut it, Yes. She's just a fucking kid. And I'm not talking about whether or not you're good for the next fight, I'm talking about in here. He pokes her forehead, lightly. You got some heavy home stuff, then you come here of all places through the scary forest of doom, the guild has you running all over to solve problems, and now you've gone through some crazy fantasy shit. It's not that it sounds nuts because that doesn't matter. I believe you, but it's like you're trying to prove something that ain't gotta be proven, especially lately. What's going on, kid? That's enough, Hales, why are you talking to her like this? If it wasn't for her we'd both be dead 10 times over by now. Please Yes, can you just take a walk for a bit? No. It's okay Yeslen. Fine, I'll be back in a bit, I have to pick up a few things for work tonight. If I get back and she's upset, I'm going to remove your fingernails with my teeth. Are you serious? You know I have a great imagination and now I'm seeing you do that and it's really nasty. Okay, think I'm joking. Shoo. Just cause you look up to her, doesn't mean you have to pretend when you're hurting. She'll understand. I don't think she will. Yeah, maybe not, but that's what makes us a good team, right? We can always count on Big Sister to be tough when we can't be. Can I ask you something? As long as it's not as silly as your first question. Of course you can. Why do you let her hit you? Yeah, wow, not at all a silly question. Well, it's no different from those kids playing the game. I know she doesn't hate me, but more than that it's just how I grew up. The other rats of the Red House were older than me and I saw them wrestle and fight, and when I got older I joined in. Yes doesn't talk about it but I think she grew up kinda the same. When she hits me after I say something I know pisses her off, it feels like how it was with them. It might hurt the same as some punk in a fight but at the same time it doesn't hurt at all. But also look, that stuff at your house sounds more like there's things that's been going on since before you were born. I don't know your old man well but, I don't know. You say your mom is so strong and obviously, just taking a look what you can do, but I wouldn't call that roughhousing even if Weslow isn't much of a tough guy. But listen, would you feel better if I gave Yes less reasons to wanna knock my head off? Kinda, yeah, I know you say it's okay but I also said it hurts. I get you, kid. I'm so sorry. Do you wanna tell me more about this stuff with the demon and God? Not yet. Let's wait for Yeslen. I'm not looking into anything yet, so don't worry, but I wanna tell you both, and my mom first. She'll probably talk to my dad about it too which sucks, but they need to know. Got it. Well here comes Yes, chip her up or I won't survive to keep my promise. Haha, thank you Hales. Don't be gross about it, but you know we love you, kid. So hey, how does Lawson know God? I don't think he does. He sent me to see an old man there who seemed like he recognized the name. But they didn't explain anything about it. Well, what do you think? Did it really seem like God? She did things that I couldn't explain, things I haven't even seen before. It definitely wasn't a trick when she sent me away and I ended up back here. But all I know is that the two of them definitely agreed that she was God, and I'm pretty sure she could see into my mind. But she also didn't know anything about me. She didn't know how old I was or my name or anything about where I came from. Was there anything she did know? She said that our meeting was a complete accident. And that it doesn't really mean anything. She definitely made sure to let me know that I wasn't special. Honestly, that makes me feel a lot better. The only tales I've ever heard of interactions with God have something to do with a fated mission or a journey or some grand adventure that ends up getting people killed. I doubt any of them are true, but still that's all I know. But what kind of things did you want to know from going to the library? I wanted to know what it was I saw in the forest, and I also wanted to know about the different types of people on our world, but it turns out that aside from not really answering anything, she also seemed like a bit of a liar. She told me that nothing in the forest could hurt me. And then she also said that it's impossible for someone to be born with 2 red stones. She seemed like she got really upset when I mentioned it, and that's when she sent me away. Your father. If I hadn't fought with him that one time, I may not have believed it about his 2 red stones either. Guess we should be glad he just ended up a drunken jerk instead of a huge threat to the world. Well, I'm definitely not God, but I can tell you a little bit about the different people that I know about. Yeah, me too. I've definitely met a lot of people over the years who've come and gone through the slums. I'm sorry, Cassandra, but with all the fighting and things that go on around here, I didn't even think to ask if there was anything you didn't know. But what are you gonna do about the rest of that stuff? I think I want to talk to whatever it was I saw in the forest. Hey, wait a second, Cassandra. You didn't exactly make it out to be the friendliest thing on the planet. If that's something you're seriously considering doing, then I have to go with you. We both will. You can't. Shal did say one thing that I believed. And it was that there are certain parts of the forest that don't want to hurt me because I'm young. There was a lot of things she said that I didn't trust, but that's something that I've seen for myself. I get a feeling that if you two try to come with me, you would definitely die. Plus I've already made it out once, so even if it wasn't true, I should still be fine. I'm not scared. Yeah, well, you're scaring me, kid. Let me ask around first and see if there's anyone who knows anything about it. Yes, you've been too quiet, you gotta say something to her. She's just doing the same thing that I would do. There's not a lot that I could say. Listen, Cassandra, I know that you're tougher than us and faster than us, and you know what to do in a fight. We don't want something like this to get you in over your head, because we know we can't help, but if I ever see God, I'm going to punch her in the face for saying that you're not special. 100% with you on that, yes. Thanks, you too, and I promise I'll be careful. That's all we want. Hey, there's something I wanna do. Don't leave yet. What's up? I'm gonna go join the game. Cheer me on a little before you two leave. You got it, kid. Of course we will. Meet new kids plus girl. Explain what she looks like. Start game. As an unofficial association of the guild, Cassandra had become quite aware of the few adults who were placed around, stationed to look out for the kids at play. If some business was going on between the young ones themselves, the adults would look the other way and let them sort it out, but if any adult tried to harm them in any way, it would be the last thing they ever tried. No matter their background, uncles, the guild masters of the slums, are dedicated to making sure the kids at least made it to their 11th birthday. At that point, there's not a whole lot anyone can do, because once they're the least bit mature enough to take care of themselves, they'll have many choices ahead of them. The most common option for people that want to stay amongst the living is to join the local guild, so they can start learning about picking locks and stealing from travelers. Or they may choose to go into a profession, whether they learn how to cook or forge or whatever was available at the time. But the point was that it was their choice to make. And that after that time, no one would be looking out for them once the night came. Before then, They were monitored and kept relatively safe during the daytime. For all the yelling and roughness, the wall game was the perfect distraction from lives that were often cut short. From between two buildings, there was a stone wall the kids had always used for the game. Basically, as far as everyone knew, the rules were simple. You throw the ball against the wall, and once it bounces back, you try to catch it. But if you happen to touch the ball in any way without catching it, you have to run to the wall before one of the other kids picked it up and hit you with it. The same goes for anyone who targets a person for dropping a ball, but missed their attack. To the wall they also must run before someone targets them.